The battlefield had gone silent. Bodies lay everywhere, and the blood on them had already cooled. A girl with pink hair held a corpse against her chest and begged it to open its eyes. Then wings unfolded from her back, burning gold against the black night. "Why?" she wept. "Why would you save me? We were never even a family. Saying it out loud changes nothing now. You ignored me for years, so why did you trade your life for mine?" That girl was Lumina Lancey, eldest daughter of Count Lancey. But the story has to begin years before this moment. She was also the price tag on a marriage no one ever asked her about. Her mother's funeral had barely ended when her father brought home a son by another woman. The whole house crowded around the boy, taking turns praising him. Her father held his new wife's hand and never once looked for his daughter. Then, one winter, her father and stepmother died in a carriage accident. The nobles gathered to bury the count and countess. Lumina and Endymion stood by the coffins with no expression at all. The guests whispered. "A carriage accident, wasn't it?" Only Endymion walked away alive. "They're both children. So who becomes head of the house?" Curious eyes settled on Lumina. "Lumina, of course it should be you." A man calling himself her uncle appeared the moment the funeral ended. "Tradition says the real heir is you, not some child like Endymion." He went to work on her from the first sentence. He seized both her hands. "And if that seat is taken from you, what becomes of you? Since my sister Chloe died, they've looked down on you. They'll deal with you first." "I won't watch my own niece treated unfairly. Think it over." "I know what you're asking," she said, "but that isn't mine to decide." He smiled, satisfied, and stood. Until then, she had been the family failure, living under a dead mother's shadow. Words like his could move a 12-year-old. After that, things arrived like rewards, money that never seemed to run out. Attention, nobles taking turns flattering her. And while she was still off balance, Joseph began taking her to the gambling houses. What happened to Endymion? What happened to the house? She had no strength left to care. Exactly as he intended, she sank into luxury, liquor, and one party after another. Somewhere along the way, the hallucinations started. She was drinking herself apart and never noticed. Years went by. "Careful with her," Joseph laughed. "This is the finest jewel house Lancey owns. One scratch lowers the price." She scowled. "Uncle, what is this? I already agreed to the political marriage you wanted." "So you really are a legend." Her whole body went still. Legends were people whose power broke past human limits. Ordinary at rest, until butterfly wings opened behind them. "Your mother never told me either. Legends wake before 5. You never did. A powerless legend, still worth more than marrying you off." Her hands shook. "So you're selling me. Do you think you can do this to me quietly? I am the head of this house." Joseph barely glanced at her. "You are a puppet head. Every relative of yours agreed to it. No one will worry when you disappear. If you die on the way, that isn't my problem." She was shaking now. Run. She had to get out of this room. "I've been dosing you for months," he added. "Fascinating. How you can't even hold your own body up." "Handle it cleanly." 2 guards stepped forward with a black cloth to blindfold her. Then something crashed. Was she really going to die here for nothing? A bleeding hand closed around her wrist. A voice she knew said, "Run!" She stared at him. However many years had passed, she could never mistake him for anyone else. He was covered in wounds. "Run somewhere none of them can find you." Then he dropped, "Endymion!" Her half-brother. The moment he stopped breathing, she finally understood what her power was. Butterflies rose around her in the dark. The brother her chosen uncle had betrayed had turned back to save her. And she could not save him. If she could turn time back, she would tell him not to save someone like her. A healing legend. People thought that was only a story. She blinked. "Who's there?" A tall young man stood over her. "You've been poisoned too long to come back from it." He brushed her face. "If I had power like this, I could have saved my son. It's too late." "But—" He stopped. "You can't rest yet. Do you want to live?" Her eyes opened. She wanted to live. She wanted Endymion alive. She wanted every one of them to pay. "There's still will in those eyes," he murmured. "Then I'll give you another life. In exchange, give me your heart." Lightning tore the sky above the manor, and the words came down with it. "Give me your heart." Then, A crack, heat bloomed across her cheek. The nobles covered their mouths. Isn't that Lady Vance? What did the child do to deserve that? That child was the eldest daughter of Lancey, still reeling from the slap. She touched her cheek. Was this a dream? She remembered nothing after that man spoke, only his face. Vance planted her hands on her hips. Is nobody's word worth hearing? Where did a girl like you crawl out from? The same delighted, pretend-worried stares she remembered from the funeral when she was 12. So she really had come back. Honestly, a girl like you only comes to her senses when she's hit. Lumina slowly raised her hand. Just like your mother. Vance never finished the sentence. The slap landed first. Lumina's face stayed calm. How funny, she thought. Vance trembled. What do you think you're doing? Weren't you the one who said a slap brings people to their senses? She smiled thinly. I thought you could use one yourself. Aunt Vance had always hated her and always circled the family's money. The woman stood there with her hand on her face, mouth open. Lumina looked past her at the nobles. It wasn't only Vance. Every person in this hall was blind with money. The life of a naive girl. She remembered all of it. The card tables, then Joseph's men dragging her away. Did they think she would sit quietly and be robbed twice? Her hand closed into a fist. You've lost your mind, Vance hissed. Yes, Lumina said brightly. So keep your distance. One life like that was enough. Playing head of the house at your age. You think you'll inherit anything? Lumina had already stopped listening. He should be somewhere nearby. Are you listening? You think you can live well without our help? Come crawling back later and I still won't lift a finger. Lumina only sighed and walked faster. Help. She had seen exactly what their help looked like. She didn't need it. She went to find Endymion. Watch to the end, Aunt. We'll live anyway. Endymion, she said quietly. Sorry I'm asking so late. It doesn't look good. A boy steadier than she had ever been, and only 10. He had been in the crash too. Blonde hair, green eyes. They had never been good parents to her. But to Endymion, they were the best parents alive. They led him away without a glance behind. She held out her hand. From now on, let's live well together. They both knew what the other's life looked like. Empty condolences would only breed suspicion. Endymion looked down, then answered, Yes, sister. A family's duty owed to Endymion. He took the deal and her hand with it. That night in the attic, one candle burning. So it wasn't a dream. She leaned against the wall. The man she met the moment before she died. She hadn't been lucid enough to know his face. She looked at the document lying on the bed. Now she knew it. Lucius von Hurt, head of House Hurt. The strongest living legend and a duke. Beautiful and cold. He also killed without blinking. For a season, he was the man behind the Legend massacre. She had never learned why that massacre happened. So why was he standing there that night? That alone explained nothing. She remembered his eyes. She had told him she could save his son. Unless he carried memories of the future the same way she did. Whatever had changed, what she had to do was clear. The document was titled Healing Legend. Luckily, she had never used it in her old life. Light gathered in her palm. Now she could use it freely. First, she had to reach the Duke. The same thing had happened on the day her identity was exposed. A pale hand dealing cards. Lumina frowned. Strange, the headaches were getting worse. Have you heard? They say the Duke of Hurt's son lost control and died. The legend boy, probably his own power. Legends, people whose ability broke past human limits. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth. Noble or commoner, anyone whose power surfaced could become one. Rare enough that once awakened, they were registered with the crown and used as living weapons. House Hurt was famous for its legends. She had heard the son couldn't survive his own strength. Shameful, being eaten by your own power. They say the more you use it, the less human you stay. I assumed rich legends wouldn't go that far. Then he's no better than a powerless one. While they talked, Lumina slumped over the table. She hit the floor. Somewhere a woman screamed. A legend! Wings opened behind her where she lay, and butterflies filled the room. Powerless legends had no destructive ability, but kept the look, so collectors bought them at obscene prices. She had been one of those purchases. She remembered Joseph's words. My sister never told me anything important, and then she simply died. Her mother was the only one who knew. Not her father, not the Count. None of them knew she was a powerless legend. Small Lumina ran up with a flower crown. Mother, the garden, Lumina. Even while I was holding you, your father was crawling into that filthy house. Lumina went rigid. Chloe walked toward her unsteady. He married me. How could he do that to me? Have you seen the child that woman had? He looks exactly like him. Why don't you? Chloe's hand touched her daughter's terrified face. Perhaps her mother had wanted to hide that her daughter was defective. Whatever the truth, only Lumina carried it now. Lumina, perfect timing, let's talk a moment. Inside, she was screaming. The relatives hadn't left the estate after the funeral. To mourn, they said. Mostly they sat, talked, and ate. She remembered meeting Joseph the first time. Who could accept that quietly? She smiled stiffly. In a hurry? He asked. That coat, you look like you borrowed it off a beggar. Let him talk. First things first. I guessed as much after my sister died. They really didn't look after you. She touched her dress. This is all I own. Is it that bad? He sighed. Perfect timing, actually. Let's go to the shops. Really? I'd love that. Her face lit up. You used me once, Uncle. This time I'll strip you down to the floorboards. At the Amelia Boutique. I like this one. And this. The clerk beamed. Joseph looked at the bill and lost color. Lumina, this is a little... Oh, am I costing you too much? You've made me so comfortable, I forgot my manners. Joseph froze. No, of course not. We're family. Enjoy yourself. He smiled like a man being skinned. You think this dress buys you a house? But who's going to hand you the rope? You're all I have, Uncle. Wake up and get ready for bankruptcy. She had emptied his wallet down to the lining. Now, before anyone noticed, she had to find the Duke. Rumor put him near here. A hand shot out of the shadows. Where have you been? Lumina blinked. Who was this? He threw a cloak over her. This way. Don't lift your head. Lumina, where did you go? She flinched. Uncle. He had assumed she was too obedient to run. He stopped when he saw the boy shielding her. Wheat-colored hair. The boy let out a pressure that told Joseph not to come closer and kept her face hidden. Joseph stopped, afraid. He looks like a child. Where is that killing intent coming from? Right. No chance Lumina would be near something like that. He fled. Stop looking around. You're making this more suspicious. She flinched. If you want to look, look properly. And if you want something, don't swallow it. Why help me? Unless you're being chased too. Are you hiding behind someone? He covered her mouth. Then we're partners. You're right. I helped because your situation looked like mine. So he had pretended to know her in front of a stranger, just to get her out. Thank you. Where are you headed? He turned away. Anywhere, as long as it's away from him. He caught her by the cloak. Wandering alone, dressed like that, they'll take you for a lost noble girl. You don't plan on being caught the second we part. Keep it. He was arrogant, she decided, and he had still helped her with all of it. I don't know what your trouble is, but I hope it works out. A good start. The owner sized her up and lost interest. Looking for your parents? There's only drink here. Then she saw it. A legend meter. Not something you find in an ordinary bar. The right place, then. I'm here to see Mr. Calvados. Calvados and apple brandy, and to the right people, the Duke of Hertz alias. Calvados, ask your parents before you order brandy. A normal customer doesn't order brandy by a man's name. He doesn't manage his staff well. I don't know where you got that name, but he isn't someone a little lady meets. And if I were a legend? Then this is the wrong door. Register with the crown. You think you're the first to claim it? I came to him precisely because I don't want the crown to know. I'm a healing legend. They say he takes an interest in legends like me. The owner twitched. That part was true. She put her hand on the meter. Miss, touching it won't help. I've caught every fraud in this city with that thing. The orb cracked. Light poured out of it, and butterflies came with the light. The owner's eyes went wide. Sir, I think it's broken. A while later, she was holding a warm cup with a rabbit painted on it. She sipped it. They assume a child likes sweet things. He had changed completely once he knew. He'd even brought tea. Don't go anywhere, wait here. Off to fetch the Duke, then. She flushed. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. A man walked in with the owner, striking enough that the room narrowed around him. The glasses don't suit him at all, she thought. Kid. Does he remember his last life too? He slammed a hand down on the table and she jumped. Where did you get that coat? This, someone gave it to me. Who? He had just punched a hole through a table beside a very small child. Why was she the one being interrogated? Captain, what do you think about restraining yourself? She's 10. I'm 12. He studied. My son wears that size, that's all. So he doesn't remember me. If he did, he would have demanded a deal on sight. She remembered the man from that night, desperate enough to beg for his son's life. Even if he doesn't remember, what stood between them wouldn't change. I've heard the outline. Let's sit somewhere else. She followed him. That man would bury Joseph and every relative with him. He was the sharpest weapon the Empire owned. They moved to a sealed room so she could be tested. Say it again. They tell me you're a healing legend. Yes. So the shop had a room where not one breath escaped. He held out a hand with a deep cut across it. Show me. I made the wound myself. No preamble at all. Fine, she thought. She thought of Endymion, who died for her, and the power came easily. Butterflies brushed the cut. Light spread, because she had never truly wanted to save anyone before. The owner stared at the healed hand. It's actually gone. It looks like she moves the wound onto herself. Caught. She closed her fingers over the new cut. How long can you hold it? I've never reached my limit, human or legend, either one. And the dead? If her power had been a little stronger, the dead, no. He watched her without blinking. Why is he staring like that? Is he worried this is transfer, not healing? She pressed a cloth to the cut on her palm. A wound this shallow would close fast enough. She had never been fed properly as a child, yet she never fell ill, and her wounds closed sooner than anyone else's. In her last life, he had barely looked at her. He said he already knew her ability was not like the others. But he did not know why she had come. Her power was rare and he wanted it. That was all. Go home, he told her. She sat there stunned. He was already standing. Wait, you're sending me away just like that? If she walked out that door, all of it was wasted. It had to be today. She had to put down something he could not step over. So she asked it straight. Was his son well? The stronger a legend was, the faster the power ate them. With bad luck, it killed them. Her healing, she said, was not limited to open wounds. If it was her, she could stop his son from losing control. She was the one person who could keep the boy alive, so she doubted he would be cruel to her. He loved his son. He stared. She knew what even the boy did not. No indifferent father, she said, knows his son's exact clothing size. And he had enough mercy in him that he wouldn't watch a child die in front of him. What did she want from him? Only to borrow his strength until she came of age. Her parents had died in a carriage accident. She and her brother were the last of the direct line, so the relatives had split into camps and gone to war over them. She thought of Endymion. She wanted her brother to inherit safely. So she had set a deadline. Her hands tightened. When she was grown, the order would settle itself. Until then, she said, be my guardian. The Duke repeated the word as though it were foreign to him. She smiled up at him and promised he would not regret choosing her. After the meeting, she got back to the Landsey estate without incident. She let her eyes water and said she'd been afraid of a scolding over a broken vase. Joseph had left a dozen messages. She ignored everyone. The room was buried in gifts, and a boy lay resting in the bed. She said his name, and he sat up, surprised. She asked how his body was. Fine, he said. And why was she here? Flowers, toys, sweets, everything a normal 10-year-old would want. A great many relatives had been through this room. The family seemed very interested in him. He sat straight and answered plainly. They came often. She narrowed her eyes, still honest as ever. He hadn't changed since the day she first met him. Even when lying would have protected him, he answered short and hid nothing. Why did I hate him, she thought. Then she asked whether he wanted to be head of the house. His face darkened. He didn't know. The relatives had surely told him to take it. He asked how he could ever do a thing like that. She came closer and told him she had been offered the same. They were busy deciding whose puppet the children became. Small children were easy to handle. To them, she said, we look like meat. She sat on the edge of his bed. If I were 15, I could ignore every one of them. She had come to say she would refuse all of it. He, though, should do as he liked. He asked why she was telling him this at all. Then he asked whether she hated him. He said it without a flicker in his face. She did. She had stopped believing in the thing people called family. The words dragged her memory where she didn't want it. There was nothing good in there, only cracks that never closed. A stepmother who beat her, a father who looked past her. She remembered the day the vase broke and her mother's muttering. Perhaps she was the vase, in pieces on the floor. And then the uncle who called himself family put a knife in her back. After all that, how was anyone supposed to stay soft? And yet, when the blindfold came off that night, her eyes were still clear. The moment light cut through that dark was the one thing she would never forget. So she looked her brother straight in the eye and told him she did not hate him. She said it without hedging. They were the only real family either of them had left, so she had decided to stop. He didn't believe it yet. Did she truly not want their father's estate? Not in the slightest, she said. She had no interest in that kind of thing. She put her hands on her hips and announced that from today, she would be a measured, upright person. Endymion blinked, measured and upright. The next morning, she ate biscuits and thought it over. Maybe it was because she'd been sincere with him. During that talk, he had mentioned where she slept. She was the legitimate daughter of Lancy. By rights, she belonged in a better room. So move quickly, he'd said. When did he get so wonderful? He thought about that for me. A knock, then a door. A guest had come for her. It was the aunt's own maids, in a great hurry, offering to dress her. Lumina got out of bed and asked who was rude enough to arrive at this hour. The Duke of Hurt was waiting downstairs. Her face lit up. Don't worry, Endymion. I'll be out of that attic sooner than you think. Dish after dish came out onto the table. The servants carried the food carefully, terrified of spilling a single drop. It was a badly matched gathering, and the air over the table was suffocating. Her uncle managed a stiff greeting. She lifted her skirt and curtsied. She gave her name in full, Lumina Lanzi, eldest daughter of House Lanzi. She had heard he asked for her, she said, smiling. He told her to sit. Vance covered her mouth and laughed that she'd never once heard the late Count mention knowing his grace. Our Lumina. What a false thing to hear. It turned her stomach, but she kept it off her face and sat down. The Duke was remarkable, she thought. He had Joseph and Teresa both squirming in their chairs. And what were all those gift boxes stacked in the corner, glittering like a small mountain? Lucius followed her eyes. They were hers, he said. Her heart jumped. Memorial flowers had seemed late, and he hadn't known what she liked, so he bought all of it. Vance marveled aloud at such attention to their Lumina. Measured, upright. The two words circled her head and lost. That promise may not survive the week. Joseph tested the water. How exactly did she know his grace? Had he perhaps known her mother? As her guardian, Lucius said flatly. Both of them flinched. Joseph shot up. He'd heard nothing about this from the Count. Lucius asked him since when House Hurt needed permission from other people's mouths. She was a child, he went on. There was nothing strange in his guardianship, and she was clever enough that he'd marry her to his son. Lumina went rigid. Marry what? She stared at him. And your son's opinion? And mine, for that matter? Vance cooed that their Lumina was such a beautiful, gentle girl. Lumina laughed weakly. He must be joking. It nearly stopped her heart. As her guardian, he added, he should see the environment she was growing up in. After dinner, would she show him her room? Vance jumped in. She was a young lady. Viewing her bedroom might be... She didn't mind at all, Lumina said cheerfully, though it was a little shabby for a duke. If that didn't trouble him, it didn't trouble her. Beside her, Vance shook with rage. That little brat. She knew exactly how the Duke would react to that room. And if the girl told him she'd been abused, would the blame land on her too? Her hands closed on the tablecloth. Fine, she would go and see it herself. When they were all inside, Lucius rested his chin on his hand and asked whether this was a wardrobe. Or a playroom. The other two shifted, and the room really did look wretched. A bedroom, she told him. The estate wasn't small, he said. There was no space for a child. Their faces were curling. Lumina savored it, darker by the second. They were afraid the marks would be found. The one who beat her was the stepmother, now dead. But these two knew and covered it. Vance snapped her fan against her palm and said Lumina must be so excited about her new guardian, a warning wrapped in sugar. She turned to the Duke, smiling, and explained that this was the punishment room. Her bedroom, of course, was separate. Children misbehave, don't they? At those times, they sent her up for a while. He watched the woman talk her way sideways. Lumina wanted attention, Vance said, but if she lied… Lumina put a hand over her mouth to hold the laugh. Vance stopped short. What is wrong with that girl? She apologized sweetly. It was only that her aunt lied without the slightest embarrassment. She couldn't help it. Vance came closer. Lie? Lumina had only repeated what the Countess told her, hadn't she? Ah, so she had only heard it from her. Then perhaps she shouldn't deliver verdicts in front of the person concerned, since she didn't actually know. So the girl was telling her she truly lived here, playing ignorant? She shrugged. Anyone could see someone had been living in the punishment room. Of course, she added. Neither of them had ever cared enough to know. Vance's jaw worked, and she looked helplessly at Joseph. Lumina smiled. From now on, she said, she would do the guiding, since His Grace was her guest. Outside, she thanked him for becoming her guardian. She walked him to the carriage. That was a genuine mess, he said. Every house has its own weather, she answered. Now she had to do her part. When could she come to him? He looked at her, surprised by the question. Whenever she liked. She blinked. Truly? She counted quietly. 6 years before his son dies. No symptoms yet. Then I can build my revenge slowly. As he opened the carriage door, she called out. There was one thing she wanted to ask. When she came to treat his son, she'd like to stay a few days. She needed time to see his condition properly. Would that be allowed? The handle turned. And if he says no? Do whatever you want, he said. Her whole face brightened. She thanked him and promised to bring a gift next time. He paused at that. The carriage pulled away and Lucius rode home. He turned the words over the whole way. A gift. For me? Brandon sat opposite him and asked how it went. He liked the girl's nerve, Lucius said. He'd already decided to be her guardian anyway. A power like that couldn't be bought with 100 million soldiers. True, Lucius said slowly. By nature, legends lack the human part. But when she used hers, the light around her was warm enough to thaw something cold. It made him feel for a moment like an ordinary man. No legend alive would refuse an ability like that. He looked down at his own palm. She knew exactly what she was worth and exactly when to step back, a child ready to negotiate. And she knew how to look strong at the moment it counted, which reminded him of a stubborn puppy, he thought, barking at things twice its size. Brandon didn't follow the expression. Still, he said, the captain shouldn't forget. That girl was very suspicious. She might even be connected to the doctor. Lucius sighed and admitted she had lied. He remembered their first meeting. She knew her own ability better than she should. Had she met a legend before? She had flinched. And then answered without hesitation. No, of course not. The child had lived inside a count's house, far from any legend. There was no way she'd met one, and no reason she should understand her own power so well. Her records disagreed with each other in a dozen places. Brandon set the papers down and rubbed his forehead. If they dug here, something would surface. Should he dig? This one was his as well, the Duke said. A strange light broke around Brandon. His hair and eyes turned blue in seconds. Brandon Muniz, vice commander of House Hurt, a legend who changed his face. He grinned. First time anyone had shed everything and still left a thread behind. He wouldn't disappoint. Then he asked whether Karajan had come home. Lucius's expression dropped at the name. The boy didn't even respect him, he said. How would he know? It's the age, Brandon offered. Every child rebels. Brandon laughed, sweating. And the wound from the day of the massacre was still open in that boy. Birdsong came back to the Lanzi estate. After the Duke's visit, her life changed a great deal. She stood at the window with her arms folded. This room was extremely familiar. It was the room she'd have been given if she'd sided with Joseph. But unlike last time, she had more than a large room now. She had a voice in this house. She turned to the relatives clinging on like leeches and made her voice soft. She'd never known her parents had such rare qualities, she said, and it comforted her that so many came to remember them. They smiled. Of course, however. Weren't they all terribly busy? She said it with a perfectly innocent face. She smiled, and the edge showed. Her parents had taught her that adults have obligations. Did they think her parents would be glad they postponed their work to weep? The whole room went still. Well, am I wrong? And with that, she cleared the estate of every mourning relative. She rested a hand on the windowsill. Those two, of course, refused to move. The nerve on those people. They represented the family's side. Throwing them out would not be simple. A knock cut her thought. The bouquet she'd asked for had arrived. She turned. Good, this one's next. With the mood in the house improving, even the servants who used to ignore her had turned friendly. A red-haired maid came in with the flowers. The flowers for His Grace were arranged as she'd asked, and the rest were going into the garden. She looks pleased, the maid thought. Unlike the stepmother they used to serve, Lumina's demands were simple, and most of the staff were eager to get close to her. They knew the workload was about to drop. She took the bouquet and thanked Samantha for always looking after her. The woman waved her hands, delighted. Then Lumina asked whether her wages were fair and offered to speak to the steward. Oh no, my lady, I'm quite content. At the word wages, her face bloomed and the maids behind her leaned in. That's how a faction gets stronger. The servants who couldn't come near her because of the past would only grow more bitter, and it was obvious where those arrows would fly. All she had to do was plant one seed of resentment among them and wait for it to sprout. The staff were at their work when another maid stalked up to Samantha. Wasn't she ashamed? She'd bullied the young lady hardest and turned around this fast. Samantha spun from the stove. When had she ever bullied anyone? Did she think nobody knew she'd dumped slop into the attic? She had no shame at all. The others joined in. That was the day the girl cried while the Countess called her a liar, and she was beaten until nightfall. Somebody put ointment on those wounds. It certainly wasn't Samantha. Samantha couldn't hold it. She was shaking, biting through her lip. She grabbed the first maid by the hair and dragged her down, asking whether she was finished, whether she was so spotless herself. The kitchen turned to noise. Someone tried to break it up and nobody listened. It was true, and they had poured wastewater in that room and run. And who did they think cleaned it up? They went at each other, Samantha with the upper hand, and the shouting filled the room. The door banged open and another maid stumbled in. She could barely breathe. This wasn't the time. The young lady had fallen down the stairs. The room went dead silent. She was sitting on the sofa with her leg bandaged. It throbbed badly. Even running for a moment had cost her. The doctor scolded her. Any higher and this would have been serious, and there were other problems too. She had to eat properly. Joseph exhaled. Joseph rounded on the staff. How exactly did they serve a master, if a loose railing went unnoticed? And they received guests looking like that. Their faces burned as they apologized. This, he said, could not be allowed to pass lightly. She tilted her head as though surprised. In fact, throw all of them out. The head maid and the steward, too. Vance moved to stop it. Dismissing everyone was excessive. And where exactly, he asked, was his behavior excessive? These people had given years to House Lancey, she said. They were at fault, certainly, but you couldn't cut their living out from under them. The two locked eyes, each doing private arithmetic. Vance had spent months buying those servants. Joseph had planned to fill the gap with his own people. Between them, Lumina sipped her tea. Keep going. Argue louder. She had planned all of this from the beginning. She knew Joseph would come to persuade her the moment he could, so she lit the fight among the servants herself. And it burned exactly the way she predicted. Now the halls were empty. Not one strand of a servant's hair left in the house. All that remained was to get injured. An accident with no staff present, and the blame lands on them. That part was easy. From her last life, she remembered the railing outside her room was loose. Every piece of it planned. A knock startled her. It was her brother, announced at the door. Vance brightened and called him in. Excited to have him on her side, Lumina thought. The woman had something to ask him. Endymion walked straight past her to the sofa and asked his sister what had happened. The garden was lovely, she said, so she leaned on the railing and went over. And what were the servants nearby doing? His indifference startled Vance. She had called a few times, but they seemed busy. The servants dropped their heads. Endymion let out a long breath. That, he said, was difficult to believe. Vance tried again. Count Melkin meant to dismiss all of them. If Endymion thought that too harsh, he should say so honestly. He was a master of this house, too. Joseph's face soured. Wasn't his sister the one who was hurt? And as this was a family matter, the eldest should be the one they followed. Vance stammered. He asked what she thought. Lumina had been ready to step in at the right second herself. Endymion had saved her the trouble. Well, as she understood it, when this sort of thing happened, They were beaten first, then branded with hot iron. Negligence in service. She'd heard it could even go to trial. But given everything they'd shared, a trial felt excessive. So instead, all of them would be dismissed. The staff went white, Samantha most of all. She thought she'd won the girl over. No, not this. Samantha rushed to her. Leaving for a disgraceful reason meant no severance and no letter of reference. She had shown enough mercy already. Lumina touched her hair and the woman shuddered. She leaned close and dropped her voice. Think about everything you did to work your temper out on me. Be grateful you're only dismissed. Consider yourself lucky your back isn't burned. The cold went straight through her. Isn't that right? A perfectly innocent smile, and it terrified the woman. That night, Lumina crept down the hall on her bad leg. The house was silent now that every servant was gone. She limped along, no one left to catch her. Endymion hadn't said much about his leg, but it clearly wasn't healing. The injury was worse than she'd thought. And her own leg was already hurt. If his wound moved on to her, no one would question it. She stood over his bed. He was deep asleep. She reached out. Butterfly wings opened behind her and light filled the room. The pain shot down her leg. It felt like the bone would snap. She shook with it. The wound must have been far worse than it looked. She held on and kept going. I expected this much, just a little longer. She was still thinking it when Endymion sat bolt upright and caught her wrist. He looked at her, confused. She panicked. He'd seen the healing. He rubbed his eyes and asked what she was doing and where the light was coming from. She smiled like an idiot. He doesn't know. There was a rat, she said. It ran out of her room and came in here. He was out of the bed and gripping her shoulders. A rat in here? He believes it, she thought. Then her leg gave out under her. Not now, hold please. It didn't hold and she went down. He crouched over her, alarmed, asking if she was all right. She sat holding her bandaged knee and laughed weakly. Her leg had just given out. Could he help her up? He didn't move. What did you do to me? What was he talking about? He stepped closer. Strangely, his leg didn't hurt anymore. He took her hands and lifted her anyway. Even half asleep, he had felt the light. And when he opened his eyes, she was beside him. Sister, what exactly did you do to me? She had been asked 3 times now. Her mouth had gone dry. I wasn't planning to tell anyone yet. But if it's Endymion, I can. She put a hand to her chest and met his eyes. It seemed, she said, that she was a legend. He said that was impossible. There had never been a single sign of it. A mutation, probably. It had only woken recently. He had never heard of such a thing. She opened both arms, and the light came out of her. She knew it was hard to believe. But the glow flared and filled his eyes. Violet wings unfolded behind her. Still think I'm not one? She asked. Convinced now? He stood there, unable to speak. The wings beat once, softly. Then he turned his face away and said he'd always known she was an unusual case, which was why she was telling him, keep both secrets, that she was a legend and that she'd healed him. She hadn't needed to say it, he answered. If the world learned this, it would become dangerous. She nodded, satisfied. He reads a situation fast. Then he said she'd fallen from that railing on purpose. So the servants could be dismissed for negligence, and their aunt's position would weaken. Goosebumps went up her arms. Sharp boy. Couldn't she heal herself? She scratched her cheek. No. But she recovered well, so a night's sleep and she'd be much better. Endymion reached toward the table. He held out a small pouch, painkillers. Because of her, his leg was fine. Hers wasn't. Medicine, she thought, looking at it. She remembered the day her stepmother beat her without mercy for lying about a rat in her room. Someone had put ointment on those wounds in secret. Her whole face changed. Don't tell me it was you that night. She took the pouch and promised to use it carefully. Alone, Endymion rolled his trouser leg up to the thigh. Not a mark on it. A wound gone overnight would raise questions. Better to limp a while longer. He stared at his own legs. He remembered her answer. So there was no rat. What? Oh, of course there was. A thin excuse, he thought. And I said it because that day came back to me. A clear blue sky and the two of them on a swing. Why was his mother so hard on her, he'd asked. There really was a rat in that room. If she could believe the girl just once. His mother sighed. She said this every time. Her mother took everything I had. She crushed the fabric of her dress. It didn't matter whether the child was telling the truth. What mattered was that she got to punish her. Just then, his father waved at them from across the lawn. She stood and smiled. It was all just the world returning to its proper shape. You understand, don't you, my treasure? In the dark, holding a medicine box, the boy asked what his sister had to do with what her mother took. He wiped his face and walked faster. Wasn't it the other way around? Wasn't he the one who took everything from her? His hands closed on his thigh, and even so, she told me her secret and healed my leg. He remembered her words. We're the only real family either of us has left, so I've decided to stop hating you. No, Endymion said quietly. Sister, you're supposed to hate me. The next morning, Joseph strolled the halls with his arms open. All the light in this world seems to be falling on me. He stopped at a door and knocked. The door flew open into his face. Lumina looked out, astonished. She stepped out as if she'd seen nothing and asked what brought him so early. Joseph clutched his reddening nose and said he'd come to talk. My nose, he thought. Then he smiled. With no servants, there were 2 patients in this house. They should hire quickly, and he had names to recommend. Ah, she said. That's true. She beamed, which was why she was going out today. His Grace had something to discuss with her, privately. As her guardian, he began, he should also— No. The word cut his sentence in half. He tried again, and she said she'd rather not. He didn't like that. Was there some reason he shouldn't come? His Grace had invited only her. If she brought her uncle, he'd think her a coward. And the Duke despised cowards and liars. What if he withdrew the guardianship? Joseph's stomach dropped, so she'd go alone. Yes, of course. He shuffled away, and she waved at his back. Honestly, I just didn't want to bring him. There was no reason at all. She exhaled. I wanted to speak to Endymion, but the morning went to Joseph. He slept late. He's probably still asleep. She looked out the window. The carriage is nearly here. She smiled. Off I go then, to House Hurt. A voice behind her made her jump. Endymion. I thought he was asleep. He was up before me. He leaned on a cane now and asked whether she was going to House Hurt. She was. She wouldn't be back for a few days, and there was nothing to worry about. It might be sudden, she said, but would he like to attend the academy? He needs somewhere safe to sit while I build the rest. Understood, he said. She blinked. Wasn't that answer a little fast? She wanted him at the academy. Then of course he should go. This was a question, she said, a suggestion. She respected what he wanted. In that case, he answered, I'll go. She stopped. Wait. He isn't reading this as me sending him away, is he? The carriage rattled along the road. Why, though? Wasn't being a good sister better than being a bad one? That night she had told him she wanted to be a good sister. He'd said she didn't need to bother because he might only become a useless burden. She seemed to have a plan, he'd said, so he would try following it once, the academy included. He did what she asked, but something in it sat wrong. Was it her sudden change? She covered her mouth and sank into it. The driver called back that they had arrived. No time to keep brooding over Endymion. She climbed down with help. The building rose in front of her, enormous. And this man mattered more than brooding. The Duke stood waiting, formidable. The only rope keeping the 2 of them out of their relatives' hands. She lifted her skirt and bowed, her foot dragging. It had been a while, she said, still as frightening as ever. I can't get used to those glasses either. He noticed at once and asked about the leg. Was it that obvious? She'd assumed he would let it pass. A twisted joint, she said. Nothing worth mentioning. He walked toward her. Why is he coming over here? He put both arms out. Then he lifted her clean off the ground and told her that walking here on a bad leg was a pointless thing to do. His steps rang down the corridor as he carried her inside. He set her on a chair. A footman placed a basket beside her. He sat across from her and ordered tea and cake. She panicked quietly. What is happening today? She sat there with her eyes very round. Then she fumbled a pink box out of the basket and told him to wait. She held it out. A gift, she said. She'd promised him one. A dessert she'd made herself. He stared across the table at it. A gift. He didn't move, so she kept talking. She hoped he liked it. It would taste better than eating alone, she added. He paused at that. She means she wants me to eat with her. There was a portion for his son, too, she went on, though he probably wouldn't touch it. Probably not, he agreed. Then she'd set his sons aside. It would be a waste to throw it out. And if the Duke wouldn't eat either, well, nothing to be done. He spoke to the man standing behind her. "Bring plates for the cake." She turned and added 2 of them. "And tea to suit a guest. Don't forget his graces." 2 plates. He folded his arms and studied her. She's persistent. A smile touched his mouth. A legend, he thought, in every sense. The tea and cake came out onto the table. Lumina bit into hers and watched him sideways. He acts like he isn't eating, and he's eating well. He lifted the fork. Nothing loosens a room like food. Now I'll ease into it. She had meant to bring a cake made by the Lanzi kitchen, she said, but something had happened recently, so it was difficult. Something? She smiled. He already knows, and he's playing along. He watches every move House Lanzi makes. Every servant had been dismissed for negligence, she said, so hiring had thrown the house into chaos. She folded her hands and tilted her head. Could His Grace recommend anyone? People who met his standards would be perfect. That was not a difficult favor, he said. Fine. Now Joseph could stop hinting about installing his own people in the Lanzi estate. She took another slice and asked whether his son was in the house. She meant to start treatment today, unless he'd gone out. No, the Duke said, he's in his room. He'd only dragged the boy home yesterday. Lucky timing. Dragged, she thought. The boy was not in good condition. Did she want to see him? There was force left over from the last outburst, so he still needed stabilizing. Leave it to her, she said. Behind the lenses, his eyes widened slightly. I assumed she'd refuse out of fear. She smiled and put a hand to her chest. This was her specialty, after all. And that, she thought, was a very large bluff. A moment later, she was pinned against a wall. Karajan leaned in and demanded to know what she was. She stared back, thrown. This is not how I saw the day going. It's definitely this boy, she thought. He looked her over more carefully. Then he asked whether they'd met before. She flinched. He's the boy from the alley. In the alley, he had been harmless. Nothing like this. What is he doing here? How did this become the situation? She had assumed she'd be walked to the young master's room. Instead, they handed her to a servant, and the servant only took her as far as the door. Then nothing. An arm shot out and shoved her, and her heart slammed. That was how she ended up against a wall. He pressed closer and asked again why she was here. She looked away instead of answering. Isn't this a little close? She asked politely whether he could step back. It startled him. He did. She brushed herself off. He asked whether she'd lied to him that day. Now that she knew who he was, she said, she couldn't do that. The person in front of her was not the boy from the alley. He was Karajan von Hurt, the Duke's only son. She switched to formal address and greeted him properly. She had come to assist with his treatment. Her name was Lumina Lanzi, she said, and she hadn't expected them to meet like this. She lifted her face and smiled at him. His eyebrows went up, and so did the color in his face. Then it clicked for him. So she was one of his father's people, planted, which explained why she'd shown up in front of him that day. Lumina blinked. A servant? He kept going. What was she doing wandering in here as if she owned it, standing around like a potato? She stared. Where is this coming from? Her silence made him worse. His fist shook. They'd told him if they sent a child, he'd drop his guard, so she was here to report everything he did. Killing intent came off him, and he watched her with it. She seems to have heard nothing from the Duke. So now I'm a spy. Your Grace. It was starting to make sense. No wonder. She remembered asking Lucius whether he would come along. She'd asked whether he didn't want to check for himself that she was honoring the contract. He'd simply said yes. Then he explained, the boy hates me. If he sees me, he runs, so I'd be no help at all. She had understood that much. She could feel it in how he said it. Rich houses have complicated weather. Then he had left her standing there. But you could have explained properly, she thought, furious. A sound from the room dragged her back to the present. Karajan's breathing had gone wrong. She put a hand to his cheek and told him to hold still. He's burning. The legend transformation was starting. He noticed the touch and caught her wrist. What are you doing? She ignored him. Force left over from the outburst. The state needs settling. She took his other arm and told him to get on the bed. She pushed him down before he could argue. What do you think you're doing? He managed. Doing what she came for, she said, and started the treatment. The light rose from her hands. He went quiet and watched. Everything in his head, which had been screaming, came clear. The pain had been taking his reason. the urge to destroy at the sight of blood. As he steadied, she began to shake, and the moment it was completely gone from him was the moment she collapsed. It felt like fog burning off at sunrise. He caught her as she fell into him. He looked down at the girl in his arms. That isn't possible. Then he panicked. What's wrong with you? He asked if she was all right and got a soft snore in answer. He laid her on the bed. Is she asleep? Right now? He asked whether she was faking. If she didn't get up, he'd have to go ask that wretched father of his. Then he poked her cheek twice while she slept. A second later, he had his head in his hands, red to the ears. I am losing my mind. In the study, Brandon asked whether the young master and the legend girl were together right now. They were, Lucius said. Now they'd see whether the child could cure Karajan. An ability like that, Brandon marveled, had never existed. Quietly, Lucius added, the Crown had been busy hunting unregistered legends lately, and she didn't want the Crown to know? No, she didn't. Later, she stood in front of him and he spoke first. She had a rare ability. So was there a reason she wouldn't go to the palace? She stopped mid-bite. She set the plate down, because she wasn't strong enough to protect herself. If the palace knew, however kindly they treated her, she'd be sent to a battlefield and used. She hated battlefields, she said, and it came out sharper than she intended. But she hated being used more. That made the man across from her go quiet. Lucius put down his pen. She said that without hesitating. Brandon thought it over too. If she were discovered, he said, they'd be in trouble as well. The Crown would never let a legend like her walk away. Lucius sighed. Then they'd have to hold the ceremony after all. Brandon looked up. What ceremony? A crash cut across the room. Someone outside was trying to stop him. Captain, the two of them. The noise startled him. Brandon turned wary and asked what was happening. Then he saw who it was and said the boy's name out loud. Karajan looked at the two of them and his eyes were furious. He had kicked the door off its frame. Explain, he said. All of it. He walked past Brandon straight to the desk. That girl and her strange magic. He slammed both hands on the wood. Who is she exactly? Lumina surfaced slowly and opened her eyes. Where am I? I've never seen this ceiling. She closed her eyes again. I treated the young master and passed out. She rolled over and Lucius spoke. So you're finally awake. Her eyes flew open and blinked twice at the man in front of her. Then she shot upright. This is house hurt. He told her she didn't have to get up. She had been asleep 4 days. She stared. 4 days? She'd slept 4 days? She had, he said. She slept like the dead, so he checked regularly to see whether she'd actually died. He'd assumed she'd only fainted, so he came to look in on me. He asked how her body felt. Wonderful, she said brightly, like she could do push-ups. He gave her a look. Could he believe her this time? He pointed out that, contrary to her claim, her leg was badly compromised. She laughed. She'd thought that was fine. She could walk normally now, so he shouldn't worry. She gave him her brightest smile. He didn't buy any of it and asked who she had healed before. She swallowed and said nothing. Private matters. The doctors had gathered and agreed, he said, that a leg like that came from a carriage accident and months of convalescence. She smiled. Ah, she'd treated her brother. She fidgeted, so he'd noticed already. From now on, he said, restrain herself. No healing anyone but his son. She nodded. There was no one else close enough to her that she'd want to spend her power on them. His eyebrow lifted at that. She looked at the ceiling instead of his face. I've forgotten something. Lucius was thinking too. I still can't believe she cured Karajan. The boy's legend strength was simply too great. A human body couldn't carry it. But if Lumina stayed near him and took the overflow, Karajan could grow up in peace. He'd be able to handle the power steadily. All it took was this one child. Across the room, Lumina made a small sound. She'd finally remembered. Lucius missed the look on her face. Karajan could avoid being eaten by his own strength, which meant her ability must not be spent carelessly. She asked whether the young master knew nothing about her. Had the Duke really said nothing in advance? He closed his eyes. He hadn't felt it was necessary. She groaned inwardly, but I was there. Then he asked whether she knew about the massacre 6 years ago. She said she did. Why bring that up now? Karajan, he said, was there. She sat with that. The son was present at the Duke's Legend massacre. Why would he be there? After it happened, Lucius went on. Karajan said something. She asked what? A woman with wheat-colored hair and pink eyes. She went very still. She had helped the boy. Wheat hair, pink eyes. A woman with that combination was rare, and as far as she knew, there was exactly one other. Her own mother, Chloe Lancey. What secret was my mother keeping from me? Legends fix on people, he said. Once one decides you belong to them, they never let go. And because she resembled that woman, he'd assumed there was no risk in letting her meet the boy. So he'd said nothing. She followed the logic. He assumed the boy would like me for living with his savior's face. But their actual meeting had gone nothing like that. If anything, he'd only been angry. Even so, he said, because of her, Karajan had cleared a difficult step. He wanted to thank her properly and to ask her to keep going. Her whole face went hot. She smiled at him. So this is what it feels like to help someone. She told him she'd said as much already. He wouldn't have to regret it. Then her stomach growled loudly. She turned scarlet. Why now, of all moments? Lucius covered for her. 4 days without food would do that. He stood. The meal was ready. At the table, she worked through every dish and all of it melted in her mouth. She propped her cheek on her hand. Delicious. How long since I ate without checking for poison? At the Lancey house, you never knew when a relative would try. They had started poisoning her long before she noticed. The thought pulled her down. But here, she thought, brightening, there was nothing to check for. She glanced at Lucius, who had something in his mouth. He'd worried when she went down saving his son. He'd stayed up watching her. Then she registered what he was holding and nearly choked. He's smoking? Smoke over the food, she thought, is barely different from poison. Unless it's candy. It was, in fact, candy. She asked, confused, whether that was a sweet and not a cigarette. He explained that his wife had disliked the smell of tobacco. She stared at him. The Duchess died years ago, so he's the devoted kind. That she had not predicted. He caught her expression and offered to have more brought up. For me? Yes, he said. If she wanted them later, she only had to say. She turned the candy over in her hand. Someone else had told her not to hold things in. These two really are father and son. She asked whether he'd sent the staff to the Lancey estate yet. She'd been unconscious and had no idea what state the house was in. His eyes went cold. Don't worry. He'd chosen quick, quiet people and sent them. By now, nothing was left. It had all been swept clean. She swallowed. Swept. He didn't send servants. He sent killers. She asked carefully what he meant. Dust, he said, barely glancing up. When she got back to the estate, she wouldn't find a speck of it since no one had been there to clean. She sweated and agreed. Right. Dust. Very important. What was I imagining? He was talking about housekeeping, and I had him cutting my uncle's throat. She sank lower in her chair. But why did she faint every time she used it? Last time she'd been fine. He rubbed his chin, comparing the two. She said cheerfully that she didn't know either. Treating his son once more would probably tell them. She lowered her head, gripping the candy. If it's simple overuse, something still doesn't add up. Maybe because it wasn't an open wound. Using it on Karajan had felt different from anything before. She remembered laying a hand on his head. Lucius's voice pulled her back. If she needed to recover after every treatment, she was better off living here. Here, she said. At House Hurt? Yes. Fewer questions that way. But he was only her guardian, she pointed out. However, the relationship was backed. Moving an heir into another house was not a simple thing. Unless the relationship were a marriage, he said. That was a different story. She froze. So he had meant it. She'd declared boldly that she intended to use this house. This was part of doing that. Why react like this? He went straight for the soft spot. Of course she'd react, she thought. And once again, nobody had asked the person concerned. The steward came in. He apologized and leaned to whisper in the Duke's ear. Lucius listened carefully. Then he stood. He had a schedule and would be away a while. The rest could wait. She sat there with nothing to say. He'd arranged everything already, and would leave her a devoted attendant. A devoted attendant, she thought. A voice went off beside her like a firework, greeting the Lady of Lancey. Olivia, here to assist. A maid with hair red as a struck match and no volume control. Lumina introduced herself and said she'd be in her care. Leave it all to me. Olivia answered, radiant. Olivia, that name is familiar. Where have I heard it? If she needed anything at all, Olivia said, she only had to ask. Then she'd like a walk in the garden. Of course. She'd heard the lady's leg was troubling her, so she'd simply carry her. Lumina declined firmly. A little support would be plenty. She was nearly healed, she explained weakly. Olivia stared at her without a word. Then she looked again and smiled with real warmth. In that case, she said, she'd get the lady ready to go out. Yellow light lay across the leaves, and the capital wore it like silk. Lumina walked and let herself enjoy it. So this is the Duke's garden. And this woman really is strong. Olivia pointed out a bed of flowers, delighted with it. I thought she was being polite. She'd seen her carry 15 trays of clothing at once. After a while, Lumina decided she liked her. The Duke's servants are a particular breed. It didn't matter. She seemed kind. Then a voice cut across the garden, sharp and ugly. How rude. Could they not step aside? What's happening over there? A girl with platinum hair was shouting. How dare they block her path? She would see them weeping on the executioner's block, she said, sweeping her hair back, chin high. She stood in front of 2 guards and would not stop. How could they treat her this way? The imperial princess and the betrothed of the young Lord Hurt. Behind a tree, Lumina stopped breathing. Betrothed. The thing His Grace had just proposed to her. She was Arabin von Lembrana, unmistakable with that platinum hair and her mix of mischief and arrogance. The emperor had only 3 children, and Arabin was the treasured daughter of the House of Lembrana, and the only legend the imperial family currently had, which made her the most famous person in the empire. But the engagement to the young Lord Hurt, she had never heard of it. Would an engagement between the crown and a duke really be arranged this quietly? She and Olivia stayed behind the tree, listening. The knight answered by the book. They had received no notice of any guest. Arabin was not going to let it go. She had heard the young lord was home, so she had come herself. A princess had come in person, wasn't refusing her the height of insolence. However great a duke's authority, before the crown every noble was the same. Her maid shouted it for her. For them, the knight said, the duke's order came first. Reason wasn't working, so the maid demanded they fetch the duke. The duke, the knight said, was away. Lumina watched the standoff and thought about it. Then she leaned over and asked Olivia whether the princess and the young lord were really engaged. Olivia smiled. She couldn't speak for the palace, but nothing official had been done on the House Hurt side. In other words, it was the princess announcing it alone. Then she added cheerfully, or was it? Lumina peeked out again. Looking at that temper, I'd believe it. Then Arabin's head turned toward her. Lumina froze. Why is she staring at me? That is terrifying. What was that child doing here? The princess demanded, pointing straight at her. From the clothes, she clearly wasn't staff. A guest, then, she said, irritated. Olivia stepped in smoothly and said she was the duke's ward. Arabin's teeth came together. His ward? She'd never heard a word about it. You, standing there gaping. The words hit Lumina like a thrown rock. The princess tossed her head and ordered her over. Lumina's temper lit. Princess or not, what an attitude. Arabin's maid barked at her to hurry up. Olivia turned and asked what her lady wished to do. Honestly, Lumina had no idea. She wanted to ask Olivia to handle it, but a report would go straight to the Duke. And then his picture of her would get worse. Fine, I'll deal with it. So she walked over and said she understood. Behind her, Olivia smiled a strange, hopeful little smile. Go on, Lady Lancey. Do this well. Arabin put a hand on her hip and asked her name. Lumina looked back at her, resigned. She gave it in full, eldest daughter of Count Lancey, and bowed her head. Lumina Lancey. First time she'd heard the name. Her eyes went over the girl, unimpressed. Someone like this made the Duke's ward? Unless she was a legend too? She asked it as though the answer would annoy her. No, Lumina said flatly. Arabin kept staring. Lumina sweated through a smile. Please just let this go. Then the princess brightened and pointed at her. She was interesting, so she would be granted the honor of taking tea with her. Oh no, she thought. Unless, yes, it could be that. She caught up fast. The point is to use me to get inside. If I'm the host's guest, the gatekeepers have no choice but to move. Was she refusing? Arabin demanded when no answer came. Nothing of the kind, Lumina said, laughing it off. It was tea with a princess. Being hated by the imperial family helped no one. But how do I get out of this? She smiled and thought ahead. The cups came out, and the set alone announced how rich the household was. Arabin crossed her legs and said flatly that she'd brought a little gift, and that today would leave a great honor on Lumina's small house. Go home and boast to your parents about it. The girl on the other side of the table went still. As the princess said, she answered, she hoped her parents felt honored, since they had died recently. Arabin jerked upright. That was unfortunate, the princess said, dropping her eyes, aware her words had landed wrong. Lumina looked at her, surprised. I assumed she was an ordinary legend. Unexpectedly, there's a person in there. Then the princess opened her mouth again. But what exactly, she asked, was her relationship with the young lord hurt? Her tone changed in a heartbeat, and killing intent came off her. Surely not the two of them. What relationship? Lumina said. She'd never met him once. Arabin pressed, the pressure still up. Never, she repeated stiffly. Then no wasted effort was needed, the princess said, satisfied. Withdraw that. Withdraw the part about there being a person in there. The door opened, and a hurried voice announced itself. Eva would bring the tea and cakes right away, she said, wheeling a cart in. Fine, Arabin said, bored. The princess glanced down at Lumina and smiled unpleasantly. She'd pour herself, she said, then drove her heel into the leg of the cart. It lurched. Lumina looked up at what was coming down on her. Careful, my lady. The whole cart went over, cakes and cups and all, straight at her. Outside in hard sunlight, steel rang against steel. Axie and the young lord were sparring, blow for blow, neither of them giving ground. Axie held his stance, the friction smoking off his heels. Karajan drove down with a clean strike and Axie turned it aside. How long had they been at this? Over 2 hours. 2 guards watched from the wall and agreed nobody was winning. Maybe it was from being home again after so long. He hits hard, one of them said. That's the young lord for you. The other kept watching. Even if Axie isn't a legend, he takes all of it. Axie was very good. He settled back into guard. Put some heart into it, Karajan told him. Was he going to go through the motions all day? The young lord could talk, Axie said. His head had been somewhere else all morning. Then he tapped him lightly across the face. Not at all, he added. Then Axie felt it. Killing intent. What is it? Karajan asked. Axie was scanning the grounds. For a second, he said, it felt like his mother was watching. A servant came running with a message for the young lord. She had news. What? He said, irritated, while Axie kept turning his head. Princess Arabin. At the name, his face closed. He'd already heard it from another servant. She'd been proposing to him since they were children, and now the name alone exhausted him. He looked away, ready to leave. The Lady Lancey was receiving the princess at this moment. At that, his eyes opened wide. The little potato? He used the name he'd given her himself. Potato, Axie repeated, lost. Don't tell me she's already been mashed. Mashed, Axie said, still lost. That's enough for today, Karajan said, turning. Was he running away from home again? Axie asked. No, he had to get there before the princess turned her into paste. He clicked his tongue. The young lord cared a great deal, Axie observed. Princess Azbek could hang herself and he wouldn't look. Karajan caught himself. She just looked like that person. He'd woken up, heard he was to meet the Duke, and been furious about it. Axie didn't buy a word. Instead of resting, he'd worked his temper out on me. He gave his lord a flat look. Karajan was already asking where she was. If the princess starts something, this becomes a problem. His face darkened at the thought of Arabin. The floor was soaked with tea and broken china, and a delicate pink dress was dripping steadily. What just happened? Lumina hadn't caught up yet and sat there blinking. Ava covered her mouth, eyes brimming. She was so sorry, my lady. It was carelessness. Carelessness. Lumina turned the word over. She remembered Olivia whispering that with Olivia gone, she'd fetch the young lord. And the princess had waved off the household staff and insisted on serving herself. So she knew a plan when she saw one. Her eyes were still smiling and everything behind them was not. How childish. At least it wasn't hot, Eva said, all sympathy. A tea party with a princess was probably impossible now. Tea was only ever the excuse. She's using me to reach the young lord. Lumina's grip closed on the cup. Then she raised it. She stood and threw the whole cup into Eva's face before the woman could move. Eva screamed at her. What was she doing? Oh dear, Lumina said, cold as glass. So sorry. You picked the wrong person. Araben's hand went to her mouth. Then the princess bit her lip and looked entertained. Lumina put on the exact wounded face Eva had used a moment ago. She was so sorry. Carelessness. Her eyes were sad and her chest was singing. Not this life. From now on, I hand back everything I was given. What did she think she was doing? Eva screamed. Lumina still had the cup in her hand. It had angered her, she said, to see this woman damage the dignity of a princess, so she'd acted without thinking. Eva's mouth opened. A lady's maid is a mirror of her mistress, isn't she? It was almost funny that a princess's own maid would behave so recklessly. She set the cup down, mildly inconvenienced. You... Araben started, and a voice from the doorway cut her off. She'd barely been awake an hour, and she was already causing trouble. The young lord. Lumina had no idea why he was there. He looked at the ruined dress, soaked through with tea. Something in his face changed. He crossed toward her. Araben lit up and darted to him, asking what had happened. Why did she look like a potato dropped in a river? She swallowed. She'd hardly gotten wet at all. He'd come alone, without Olivia. Did he come looking for me? She checked the corridor. No Olivia anywhere. Wasn't this the first time the two of them had met? Araben's voice cracked across the room and Lumina nearly jumped out of her skin. For a first meeting, the princess said they seemed awfully close. The young lord heard it clearly. He looked genuinely confused. Lumina slid her eyes sideways. Really? They had truly never met? Yes, she'd said exactly that. She remembered the promise and her stomach dropped. And now here they were. Araben's glare pinned her down. If I lie badly, it only feeds her. I cannot be hated any harder in this room. Almost the first time, she said brightly, and left it to the young lord's judgment. Since she was the Duke's ward, she added, his grace had surely pointed her out at some stage. Karajan's face went blank. What is she talking about? Isn't that right, my lord? She widened her eyes at him until he gave in. Yes, that's right. Strange, Araben said. The young lord she knew took no interest in anyone. So why was he covering for this girl? She was in front of him now, hunting for an answer. Unless the girl mattered to him. Her eyes gleamed. He told her to stop talking nonsense. She was the one who'd walked into someone else's house and started performing. And was that any way to speak to the imperial family, she shot back, startled by his tone all the same. She hadn't done anything. Lumina watched. She's shameless. The broken cups weren't her doing, the princess insisted. Eva. At her name, the woman flinched and answered, And you? Karajan looked at her without much interest. It was carelessness, Eva managed. Tell the truth, he said, or she might be leaving here with nothing but her tongue. She had only bumped the cart reaching for the pot, she said, and her voice was thin. There's no proof it was deliberate, she told herself. And what can a small girl do to me? And if the princess backs my version, she had gone gray, waiting for Araben to save her. I watched you kick that cart, the princess said. Eva's head came up. Princess, please. Doing things nobody asked for, Araben sighed, disappointed. If she were the lady, she wouldn't have finished it with a cup of tea. She'd heard enough. Take her out. Karajan was already having her removed. There was no proof, Eva shouted. She was innocent, and the only wage loyalty ever paid her was being thrown away. Proof, Araben repeated. So the woman was calling a member of the imperial line a liar. Eva sat on the floor and went cold. As someone once said, better to have nothing than to keep people who damage her dignity. She looked down from a great height, and her voice matched it. He told Lumina afterward that she truly didn't understand how stubborn that princess was. With the maid planted and now causing a scene, Araben might have run rather than face the Duke's methods. Lumina glanced up while he spoke. Why was he standing out there talking through a door? The lady was bathing, the maids explained, so he was too embarrassed to come in. He'd asked them to keep her from catching a chill and to check whether her leg was still troubling her. The maids leaned into each other, giggling at him. That isn't the young lord's character at all, she thought, sighing. Still, she and Karajan were going to meet often in the years ahead. So building goodwill here, the way she had with his father, would pay far better. What is it? He said, arms folded. She'd been lying so much she couldn't say it properly. Thank you, she told him, for helping her. It was nothing. If she went around on a leg like that, she'd only walk into something worse. Was he worried about her? Absolutely not, he snapped, which was exactly the wrong answer. Was that so? She said very softly. His whole face went red. Anyway, he said, turning away, he hadn't meant to bring this up. Oh? He thought about it a moment. He'd give her one piece of advice. If she wanted a quiet life, she should stay away from this family. The warning came with a click of his tongue, and it got her attention. But she was already the Duke's ward. Cancel it, he said. And if she wanted her body to recover, she should run. Fast. She covered her mouth, thinking. He didn't know why she was calling herself his father's errand girl, but he was going to tell her this much. Don't trust the Duke. His eyes had gone sharp. Why? She wasn't stupid enough to obey without a reason, she said, and she meant it. The day of the Legend massacre, he said, looking at the floor. Legends weren't the only people his father killed. She went very still. His voice came out cold and alone. Even my mother. He killed her too. Time at the Duke's house went quickly. Dawn came through the glass, and a soft voice called for the young lady. A maid with auburn hair pinned up neatly came in, smiling, and asked whether the lady was going home today. Lumina had a violet bag over her shoulder and a dress to match. She was, she said, but first she wanted to see the Duke, since she hadn't laid eyes on him once since waking. Standing at a door a little later, she looked at it doubtfully and asked whether this was really his room. It was. He was probably inside. She frowned at it anyway. The office door seems to have been replaced. Did someone break it down? An envelope and a letter lay on the desk. She asked whether these were the letters Joseph Melkin had sent. She picked one up and stared. How many are there? He had answered, the man in black said, and they kept coming. If she wanted to read them, she could. She read one through, exactly as expected. His plan had collapsed, and now he was frightened. Lucius came over as she finished, leaning slightly. She looked up and asked whether he'd received any other letters. None, he said. Was she expecting someone? Her face fell a little. She looked down at the paper. She'd thought her brother might have written, so she'd been worrying. Endymion. Unlike her, living comfortably in a Duke's house, her brother was stuck among the relatives. She'd been thinking of sending him to the academy, she said, putting the letter down. The academy, Lucius repeated, tilting his head. She lit up and started talking with her hands. Her brother was extremely clever. If he went to the academy, he wouldn't lose the top seat once. He was the kind of child who repaid the smallest help. He listened to her praise the boy, then thought about how naturally it came out of her. Sending the brother away would get him out of the relatives' reach, but she had no power yet, so she wanted help. He looked at the hope in her eyes and read the whole plan. Not bad, he said. He'd look into the paperwork himself. Her face broke open in a smile. She rushed forward to hug him, thanking him at full volume, telling him he was the best. Lucius went rigid, his face darkening in alarm. She caught herself, too close. She stopped without meaning to. She stepped back very carefully and apologized. He didn't look angry, only distant. It was nothing, he said. And he was the one who should be grateful. She'd done her work well. Her work, she thought, puzzled. He inclined his head and something rare and gentle showed behind his eyes. She'd treated Karajan well. The boy had even come to him directly about it. She stared. A smile like that from him. I think he's actually happy. He was glad to feel closer to his son. It mattered because the boy hadn't come near him since Iris died. Iris. The Duchess's name. Just saying it changed the shape of his voice. She remembered a boy standing in a doorway telling her his father was the one who killed his mother. Could a man like this really have killed his own wife? The warmth was still on his face. Then she jumped up, remembering something, and he tilted his head at her. She wanted to give him something, she said, digging through her bag. She came up with a bunch of pale violets and held them out. They were blooming in the garden. His flowers had filled her room with scent, and she'd noticed his office had nothing in it at all. He said nothing. She held them out further. Nobody took them. Her arm stayed up and her smile got harder to hold. What is this reaction? Did I say the wrong thing again? The violets glittered, opening petal by petal. Winning this man's affection was not going to be easy. Of course. She hadn't finished the sentence when he cut across her, entirely serious. Hold the binding ceremony with Karajan. He crossed to the desk and searched through it. The marriage was only a cover for a clean contract, and he'd arranged the divorce once the contract ended. She was thrown. What did the young lord think about it? If he didn't want it, none of this worked. She laughed weakly and pressed a hand to her chest. He loves Karajan. Saying it like that would be awkward, wouldn't it? Karajan would accept it gladly, Lucius said. He might even be relieved to escape Princess Araben's proposals. And there it was. They looked like they were protecting her. What they wanted was a shield. It was a trade, all the way down. Her lashes came down and something sour spread through her. She managed a thin smile. She turned away and closed her eyes. But the Duke wasn't wrong. Married, they could see each other constantly and nobody would ask why. Still. She pictured Lucius as a boy, and as he was now, and something in her recoiled. Wife of the young Lord of House Hurt. That genuinely was not possible. She buried her face in her hands. The rumor about being his ward was already out, but becoming his son's wife, he cut her off, holding out a sheet of paper. On divorce, he said, the settlement would be this much. She stared at the figure. Settlement. She counted the digits. 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. 100,000. Her eyes went glassy. She grabbed her own head. No, don't be swayed, Lumina. He read her expression as dissatisfaction. Not enough, he said, and scratched something in. He handed the paper back across the desk. He'd revised the offer. She peeked at it. Gold coins stacked and spilling over the edge of the page, glittering, and she turned to Stone. How many zeros is that? I'll do it, she said. Lucius smiled, satisfied. The number the Duke of Hurt put on the table was simply too large to refuse. The next day at a beautiful estate. The outside was bright. Inside, every window was covered and the room ran on candlelight. Lumina looked around. Is it raining? This is my binding ceremony. She was anxious enough that both hands had closed into fists. Then something occurred to her. Wait, what he said that day. Her mind went back. Lucius had warned her. Because of what she was, the ceremony would be held in a slightly unusual way. Unusual how, she'd asked. He explained before she could spiral. A vow spoken aloud, a contract binding two souls together, hers specifically. Back in the present, she looked around the room and quietly despaired. Is this a seance? Just then, Lucius appeared. He looked her over and remarked that she was punctual. She walked toward him. Olivia had woken her, she said. But your grace. What? He asked. She had reached a strange red magic circle drawn on the floor and stared down at it. What exactly is this? A formation built on ancient magic, he said. She clearly hadn't caught up. Ancient magic. It took her a moment. Her face fell apart. That's illegal. As far as she knew, ancient magic had died out long ago, treated as an evil power in an empire built on magical technology. What survived from that line was now called black magic, which was also illegal. She could not stop herself imagining the worst case. Are we all going to prison together, holding hands? He read it off her face and chose his words. The Hurt ancestors had been very interested in this. Thanks to her, he thought the ceremony would go smoothly. The silence afterward was remarkable. Lumina had no move left. What is this atmosphere? Olivia broke it by appearing from somewhere. Your Grace, please check the chalice one last time. Very well, he said. Then the door opened. Lumina stopped caring about the other two entirely. It was Karajan. He was in a spotless white suit, and she was clearly startled to see him. You came, my lord. She watched him walk toward her, full of questions. I assumed he'd refuse coldly. How did anyone talk him into this? He noticed her staring and asked, perfectly serious, whether she liked him. Nothing showed on her face. Everything behind it was screaming. He was in front of her and he'd spoken first, so she was stuck. I want to ignore that because he clearly has an illness common to princes. But we'll be seeing each other constantly from now on, so I'll open this generous heart of mine. Having found her reason, she exhaled. So she smiled at him beautifully and said yes, she did. The boy went scarlet to the ears. He turned his head away and told her that meeting a few times didn't entitle her to say things like that. But I like money, she thought, and kept it to herself. However much she liked him, he went on, what was she supposed to do about a proposal sprung on her like this? Every word made it worse. Right. Eventually, still flushed, he explained. The moment he woke as a legend, his father had come to him begging for help. He didn't want her taking it wrong. He was glad not to have to meet the princess, but she was a different matter. Her face cleared. Ah, now I know how the Duke sold this. Instead of treating her as a partner, he'd presented her as an innocent lamb being taken advantage of. In her head, she was the lamb, dropped into the pen by the demon Lucius himself. My lord, I adore you. Karajan pulled himself together. Either way, they could divorce as adults. It was worse than an arranged marriage. Was she really all right with it? She had no complaints whatsoever, because I'm getting an enormous settlement out of it. Her enthusiasm defeated him. At this rate, he warned, some strange man would trick her one day. She disagreed privately. If anyone's being tricked here, it's you. Then his voice changed into something much colder. He'd already told her, stay away from this house, which meant he could threaten her too. Instead of going quiet, she answered him. People who genuinely intend to kill you don't announce it. They hide the knife and act kind. He stopped dead. So if he was telling her he was frightening, she wasn't going to believe him. She looked straight at him when she said it. The ceremony began. Each of them let a drop of blood fall into the water at the center of the circle. They stood facing one another. When blood and water mixed, Lumina spoke her vow. I, Lumina Lancy, will be the mirror that lights two souls, and I will look only at him. Karajan followed. I, Karajan von Hurt. From the moment two hearts are bound, I will listen only to her. The basin lit up and two red stones rose and hung in the air. Lucius saw the ceremony reach its end and called Olivia over. She understood at once. A servant fastened a chain around Lumina's neck. She touched the stone at her throat. A necklace. Then she noticed Karajan fumbling with something of his own. An earring? Lucius watched the two children finish, and even behind dark lenses the smile said everything. From now on, whenever that boy needs her, she is the first person he can find. Something in her expression flattened. I thought I was the one doing the using. Why does this feel backwards? After the ceremony, Lumina came back down to the hall. There, a red-haired boy greeted her for the first time. He would be her guard, he said. His name was Axi Muniz. At the name, her eyes went bright. Muniz. She'd heard about him from the Duke. Her manner confused him. He was only a bodyguard, he said. She should speak casually. Olivia appeared and clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to make him jump. This one was her son. If he did anything wrong, the lady should tell her immediately. Lumina had half expected it and still marveled. Mother, you two really are alike. She looked from one to the other. From now on, every move I make gets reported to the Duke. I need to be very good to these two. Decision made, she ran over and hugged Olivia, telling her she would miss her terribly once she went home, so Olivia mustn't forget her. She gave her the most pitiful look she owned. Olivia rushed to reassure her that she could never forget the lady. Only Axie stood there, defeated by the scene. Walking her out to the carriage, Olivia was still giving instructions. Don't skip meals, and absolutely no running around, because she still wasn't reassured. Lumina agreed to all of it. The carriage rolled away over the stones. Inside, listening to the wheels, her face went thoughtful and stayed that way. On the road home, she finally recovered the memory she'd misplaced. Her expression tightened. Why couldn't I place it immediately? Olivia Muniz. She said the name again. Back at the Von Hurt estate, Olivia let her hair down and walked the corridor. She went to report to Lucius, not a legend, but an ordinary woman, a gifted vice commander and his steadiest right hand. And in the last life, one of the very few who betrayed Lucius. Lumina sat with that all the way home. Olivia stepped into the study to give her report. Very well, Olivia. She'd spent an entire day beside that child. What did she think? Lucius pushed his chair back and stood. Olivia's hands closed. She was clearly wrestling with herself. She would tell him honestly. Then her whole face lit with pure delight. She was extremely, extremely adorable. Lucius had not prepared for that answer. Ignoring his expression entirely, Olivia kept going. He'd seen it himself, hadn't he, the moment the girl threw her arms around her. Soft, like spun sugar. He slammed the desk before she could continue. That, he said, was not what he asked. He came around the desk with his hands in his pockets and said what was actually bothering him. The child knew his alias was Calvados. And having spoken with her, he could see where she differed from the file. Olivia dropped the giddiness and thought carefully. There was nothing suspicious. If anything, the girl seemed so cheerful that it made her sadder to watch. He gave up. Olivia, he said, that is far too sentimental for you. She didn't take it. It was his Grace, she pointed out, who was carefully keeping the violets the Lady Lancey gave him. There was a pot of them on his desk, bright and unmistakably tended. He had no answer to that and told her to watch her mouth. Olivia snapped back into her steward's posture and studied him sideways. He's been soft lately. Ah, there's the cold again. But he did something completely unlike himself. From now on, no more calling her Lancey. Use a proper name for my daughter-in-law. The room went quiet after that. Olivia gave him a long, evaluating look. Then he turned to the window and asked about the other matter. No word from Brandon. Nothing said to her privately either? Nothing? Olivia smiled and explained that if there'd been no return on this one, the little madam had genuinely gone to find the Duke alone. Lucius trusted 2 vice commanders with his work. Olivia worked for him in daylight, Brandon in the dark, and the 2 of them were married and well-matched. When he came back, she said, give him leave. She hadn't seen her husband's face in days. Lucius's expression stayed flat. Because his back was turned, Olivia missed how carefully he was thinking. Brandon says there's no distinctive trail either. She doesn't seem to be deceiving me. She went on complaining that she missed her husband. Lucius let it wash over him. Finally, he went back to the desk and changed the subject. Olivia, next matter. After a long ride, Lumina reached the Lancey estate. Servants were lined up on both sides bowing as she stepped through the door, and the house shone. She stopped dead. What is this? She turned in a slow circle, staring. This is definitely the Lancey estate. A well-dressed man stepped forward and apologized for the late introduction. From today, he would be managing the Lancey estate. His name was Harrow, he said, with a hand to his chest. He bowed and explained why the house looked nothing like itself. It had been renovated while she was away, and she could inspect it at her convenience. Lumina could only stare. The Duke's people, of course. However many times she saw it, she never got used to it. Then she set it aside and asked about Endymion. Still smiling, Harrow told her the young master was in his room. He'd been afraid she would be tired, so he hadn't come out first. Something occurred to her, and she turned back. Both her uncle and her aunt were still in this house, weren't they? They were, he confirmed. She smiled far too pleasantly at that. Then, first of all, call those 2 in. Harrow led her to a tea room. Joseph, hearing she was back, came running. Lumina, you're finally home. He dropped into a chair, clutching his head, playing the martyr. He'd waited so long his neck had stretched. And then servants had simply stormed in claiming the Duke's orders. She drank her tea without hurrying. Guardian or not, wasn't this excessive interference? She put the cup down and answered in a way that closed his throat. She had asked for it herself, and she was grateful he'd been willing to help. The house was very tidy, and she was pleased with it. Joseph had not prepared for that answer either. She watched the tea shift in the cup and went straight at it. She'd called them both because she had something to say. Uncle, Aunt, get out of this house, right now. She said it with a perfectly untroubled face. Joseph's face came apart while Vance bit down on her lip. What did you just say? Vance came back to herself, shaking with rage. To be this stupid. Finally, she slammed the table and stood, her whole face ugly with it. So the girl was leaning on the Duke's authority now. He was only a guardian. And if her support ever slipped, even Endymion would be dragged down with her. It was meant as a threat. Lumina only smiled at her. So we've stopped playing the gentle aunt. Joseph laughed nervously, matching her. She must be so confused. Lumina weighed him too, and this one plays flustered and never actually intervenes. She pictured it clearly, Joseph and Vance on one side and the 2 of them on the other. She sighed. I never imagined the day you 2 would agree on something. When she'd enjoyed it enough, she spoke. So her aunt was worried about her? The weight in her voice made Vance step back. Yes, exactly. If you understand, then... Lumina cut across her. But Aunt... Worry is a fine thing. Help that the person concerned never asked for is usually called interference. She said it smiling. Before Vance could recover, she added brightly that Endymion would be going to the academy. Her aunt was close to him, wasn't she? Apparently she hadn't heard. That set Vance off again. Joseph shot to his feet, alarmed. Wait, Lumina, then you'd be alone in this estate? She had that one ready. He shouldn't worry because she was married. To Karajan von Hurt. To sell it, she clutched her cheeks like a girl in her first love affair. Both of them questioned their own existence. Married. It took a long moment for either to come back. Lumina, what is this? And afterward, she'd be learning to lead the family under the Duke's wing, because House Hurt was no longer somebody else's family. She tilted her head, innocent as milk. Neither of them had anything left, so she reached over and rang the bell. She assumed they both understood now. 2 men in black stepped in at the sound. My lady, you called. She smiled with enormous sympathy and said her aunt and uncle had just announced they were going home immediately, so please help them. The men who had been at the door were suddenly at Joseph's and Vance's shoulders. Understood, my lady. They lifted them both before either could resist. Vance screamed at her. Do you think you can live well like this? Lumina only smiled with the corner of her mouth, and the woman ground her teeth in fury. Yes, aunt, watch to the very end, see whether I live better than anyone. She said it as a dare. With the relatives handled, Lumina hurried out to the garden, delighted the moment she saw a familiar shape. Endymion. He was standing in the courtyard and turned at his name. She ran the rest of the way and asked how he was. Sister, he said. She hadn't come alone. Axie stood behind her. Before she could ask anything else, Endymion went straight to the point. He'd received notice of an entrance examination. She'd been mid-greeting and the words stopped her. Her face went stiff. Right. The academy. Inwardly, she had no idea what to do with him. We haven't been in the same room 10 seconds. She looked at the very serious blonde boy in front of her. Perhaps this is the second page of my real life. He carried on, unaware. The schedule was extremely tight. She explained without hesitating. She'd rushed it because she was afraid the relatives would interfere. And the Duke used several very fast methods, she added, silently. He let it go and asked instead whether her leg had healed. She put a hand on her hip and said she could run now. He smiled at that gently. That's a relief. Something cracked open in her chest. Oh, he was worried about me. Her face went soft and she completely missed him staring at Axie. And who is that? It took her a while to surface. She introduced Axie as the bodyguard the Duke had given her, and Endymion as her brother. Axie crossed a hand over his chest and greeted him, and Endymion said nothing at all, which made the whole thing awkward. To break it, Lumina asked whether she could come with him to the exam tomorrow. He turned to her immediately and agreed. Axie said he'd make arrangements. Both of them looked bored, and she looked thrilled. Really? It would be their first time going out together. She clasped her hands, glowing like spring. The next morning at Nezero Academy, saw an enormous blue palace of a building. At the gate, she coached him. Don't worry too much. Skip the questions he wasn't sure of and come back to them. He didn't look remotely nervous. Then she remembered something, fished a sweet out of her pocket and pushed it into his hand. He might crash halfway through, so he should carry sugar. Endymion accepted it because resistance was pointless. He looked at the candy and told her plainly that she seemed more nervous than he was. She stopped. Oh, do I? She scratched her head, finally noticing. If it's Endymion, he'll manage on his own, and here I am interfering. He turned to go in. Then she remembered. Oh, right. Since he had an exam, she'd forgotten to mention it. She was married now, she announced, and a garden seemed to bloom behind her. Endymion stopped walking, and the candy hit the ground. He turned around, and his face was terrifying. She missed it entirely, bent to pick the sweet up, and scolded him for dropping it. No, never mind that, he said. Married? What exactly? She put the candy back in front of his face. She'd explain in detail after the exam, she promised. He closed his fist around it, looking ready to kill someone. Understood. He walked into the academy like a body with the soul removed. Lumina waved cheerfully after him. Good luck. See you soon. Once he was gone, she turned to Axie and suggested they tour the city, since the exam ran long. He nodded. She looked at the very correct young man beside her and quietly rejoiced. This is my chance to get close to the future master of the sword. More than anything, she wanted to know more about House Muniz. In her last life, a rumor had gone around the upper circles. She'd been drifting through some banquet when the whispering of a few young ladies reached her. House Muniz has fallen. They betrayed the Duke of Hurt. Lumina had stopped where she stood. She hid behind a pillar and listened to all of it. Careful what you say. If the Duke learns this is being discussed, he'll punish it. Why? The other asked. What did a vice commander's betrayal have to do with anything? The Duke had said he didn't want the story spreading. It shook her, one of them said, that a subordinate close enough to be a vice commander had turned. Lumina had sat down against the pillar. The rare traitor. That was the name attached to Olivia when she died. The woman who betrayed Lucius. And here was the strange part. Axi Muniz, the traitor's son, was never punished for any of it. Despite endless criticism, he stayed in the Duke's own shadow order. She remembered it clearly. Back in the present, looking at the gold rooftops, her chest was crowded. At the time, I decided it had nothing to do with me, so I never dug. The more she turned it over, the stranger it got. There is something here. She was sure of it. She turned and pointed ahead. Axi, let's go toward the busy quarter. Axi watched the girl walking ahead of him in silence. The longer he looked, the less his orders made sense. She was an unremarkable girl. So why give an order like that? Days earlier, in the study, Lucius had given it plainly. Watch her directly and report. Me? Axi had repeated. Yes. And since he couldn't act when a question was hard to answer, he should simply say nothing. In case the boy got cornered, Lucius even supplied a fallback line. It's fine. Perfectly normal. No, just answer exactly like that. Axi had run completely out of words. There's something I want to tell you, the girl said. You're a parasite. You live by feeding off other people's lives. It went into him like a blade. And she didn't stop there. A garbage life. The kind of garbage that won't even burn. Selling other people's faces over and over. He was shaking, begging her to stop. She walked closer without hurrying. You spread rumors about strangers freely. You just can't take being picked apart yourself. But the morning had started quietly, hours before that. Axi decided not to use the Duke's lines yet, and the two of them walked an empty street without speaking. Then Lumina stopped and said, close to his ear, that an awful lot of people seemed to be looking at her. Perfectly normal, he said. She had no idea what to do with that. What is he even saying? But Axi turned to look at the people holding newspapers, and they glanced back and away. So it wasn't imagined. When they saw she'd noticed, some covered their faces and some turned, trying to look natural. They're glancing at me over a newspaper. Rather than guess, she went to a boy selling papers and asked for one. She looked at it and went pale. Across the front page, exclusive. The young Lord Hurt announces a sudden marriage, registered, and the ceremony already held. She was stunned. What is this? Her private life had become the Empire's headline. The further she read, the angrier she got. So they waited outside the Count's house and photographed her. If it made the papers, most of the Empire knew her face by now, she despaired. Let me catch one of them and see. In an alley nearby, a man had a camera ready. He was firing it off steadily. A girl who changed her whole life overnight by becoming the young lord's wife. Every paper in the capital wanted her. He looked over what he'd taken, delighted. He checked the frames properly, and the quality disappointed him. Blurred. He'd have to shoot again. As he raised the camera, Axi appeared and kicked it out of his hands. Axi's face didn't move at all. Then the man recognized him. Wasn't that the Kenton who hung around the Landsey girl? And there she was behind him, holding the camera up. Kenton? She looked at him with open contempt. He photographed people without asking and used words like that. Wasn't he simply garbage all the way down? Kenton was a slur for a child born between an imperial citizen and a wandering minority, a word no one should say aloud. He still couldn't believe it. I've never been caught. He was only a passerby, he tried. On what grounds? She didn't give him the room. She knew how to use a camera, and she'd already checked every picture on it. He had nothing. A few minutes earlier, while she'd still been shaking with anger, Axi had turned toward something. My bodyguard is good enough. With the proof in hand, she asked why he didn't confess. He looked away, sullen. He didn't know what she was talking about. She raised the camera as if to smash it. Did he take them or not? He admitted it instantly. He took them. He took them. When she didn't lower it, he panicked. He'd apologize, but she should hand it back. Did she know what that cost? One look at your face tells me everything. A notorious photographer once. Right now, he looked like an intern, but in about 5 years, he would become the worst of the worst. There was a time when one of his photographs was sold attached to a lie and someone died over it. Taking the camera today wouldn't change the future. He would buy another and do the same thing. Her grip on it tightened. But putting Axie down, that she could not let pass. If he wanted the camera back, he'd repeat after her. 1, he is a person. 2, do not insult where someone comes from. Jack didn't follow. When he stayed silent, she pressed. 1. Axie was looking at him with murder in his eyes now. He got it out. He is a person. Eventually it was over, and she was mildly satisfied. Well done. But forgiveness was Axie's call, and he could hit the man until the anger ran out. Jack looked at him pleadingly. Axie declined. He was fine. She wasn't reassured. Was he really all right? The man had insulted him a moment ago. Axie didn't move a muscle. At that level, it was nothing. That answer irritated her. She put her hands on her hips. Exactly how often does he hear it, that he can look like that? Since he clearly wasn't going to change his mind, she stepped forward herself. Fine. If he wouldn't, she would. She drew one leg back and drove her foot squarely between Jack's. Axie's face registered actual horror. He had not seen that coming. She swore at the man as she did it. With that dealt with, they went back to the gates of Nezuro Academy, and Lumina sounded very pleased with herself. Caught a photographer, bought presents for Endymion. She watched the servants loading it all into the carriage. Then she looked over at Axie standing apart and thanked him, saying today would have been hard without him. He coughed and said it was nothing. Then she remembered something. Axie, take this. He looked up. A white box tied carefully with a violet ribbon. He took it and stared at it. While they were shopping, she explained, his eyes never left the desserts, so she'd bought some. He was thrown. I assumed she was busy picking things for her brother. He remembered her in the sweet shop waving across the counter, everything from here to there, please. His silence read as something else to her. What was it? Did he not like them? He did, he said. His face gave nothing away, but the voice did. That settled her. Good. The Duke carries sweets everywhere, too. You two have the same taste. He went rigid all the way through. Now that I think about it, I said something the Duke did not authorize. Just then, Lumina noticed something. The exam must have ended. Children were pouring out and finding their parents. She spotted her brother at once and waved. Endymion, over here, how did it go? Were the questions hard? Her whole face was glowing. He was in no mood for it. Sister, what is this about a marriage? She went stiff, straight to the point again. Perhaps they could get in the carriage first. She hedged, then said it. The person she'd married was the young Lord Hurt. At the name, Endymion's world came apart. So she'd known him beforehand, he said. She hadn't. She'd been in that house the entire time. The questions came in a line. Had he confessed that he loved her madly? Could he give her half his heart? Nobody has ever confessed anything like that to me. If anything, he thinks I'm the one madly in love with him. That part stayed inside. Endymion kept staring. Then why marry at all? As he saw it, she'd been tricked. Under the marriage code, a marriage could be annulled without a guardian's consent. She raised a hand. She did it because she wanted to. He watched her with nothing in his eyes at all. He still doesn't believe me. No choice then. Hard measures. She smoothed her skirt. Honestly, she hadn't wanted to bring this up. She had fallen for Karajan at first sight. For realism, she added a swoon. That shocked Endymion and Axie in equal measure. Their reaction stopped her cold. Why is Axie panicking? To finish the job, she praised Karajan without restraint. He was extremely impressive, she said, arranging her face into excitement. She used every word she had. Hair like chestnut. Golden eyes full of sunlight. A presence that held both day and night. And a face as sharp as a lone wolf's. Endymion's eyes went enormous. Outwardly composed and thrilled. Inwardly writhing with embarrassment. Seeing his sister so taken, Endymion gave ground. He looked at the floor a long moment. If she liked him that much, there was nothing to be done. She celebrated internally. The lone wolf strategy works. He'd agreed, and he was still miserable, gripping his trousers. But sister. She'd only met a man once or twice, so she wouldn't know. His voice turned very serious, and it startled her. And for some reason, her whole body locked up. He didn't make her wait. He'd heard love and marriage were different things. If the young lord had a character problem behind that face, she was to tell him. She agreed out loud and screamed inwardly, "What does a child know about any of this?" Then Endymion remembered Axie was right there. He came from the ducal house, so he surely knew the young lord. What sort of person was he? Axie was cornered. 3 prepared answers rose in his head. Fine, nothing at all, perfectly normal, and the needle was drifting toward the 3rd. He committed, perfectly normal. Endymion's opinion dropped straight through the floor, because normal is not a compliment. Lumina scrambled for a new subject. Her face brightened. Ah, right, Endymion. She'd actually bought something while he was sitting the exam. It worked. His head came up. For me? She took her time now. She'd wrapped them all so he should open them one at a time at home. He ducked his head to hide the color in his cheeks and said he understood. She stared. I never expected that reaction. Oh, he likes it. After a long ride, the 3 of them reached the Lancy estate. Standing in his room, Endymion held a stuffed bear and darkened considerably. The gift was a teddy bear. Which of us is the child here? While she directed the servants on where to put things, Endymion asked her outright what this was. She glanced at the bear. Ah, from the toy shop. She told the servants to move the rest across. Endymion eyed the stack of boxes. Please tell me those aren't all dolls. She was focused on the bear. He'd know no one in the dormitory. Daytime would be fine, but nights got lonely. And at times like that, she lifted the bear and kissed its nose. Then she held it out to him, beaming. I love you. Press its chest, she said. She was radiant, and he answered as flatly as a person can. Yes, understood. She missed his lack of enthusiasm completely and put it in his hands. He was to hold it while sleeping. Absolutely. Then she left, and it was just the boy and the bear. He stared at it. I love you. The secret hobbies of the nobility. Lumina read the headline twice. Everyone who organized the black magic research meetings arrested. It had gone dark outside. A servant set a beautifully arranged dish in front of Lumina and Endymion. She finished the paper and handed it over. The nobles were under continuous investigation now, and the Lancy relatives were involved. She smiled at that, and there was something under it. So they'd tried to build a new business out of black magic. I always wondered why Joseph was so cheerful when this story broke last time. His delighted face reading the article came back to her clearly. Now she understood. It had been a project run by House Valesa, and Teresa was buried dealing with it, which was how her uncle got Lancy to himself. She cut into her steak, elegant and satisfied, and now that pleasure is mine. Her reaction made Endymion curious. Had she had a hand in it? Her? Absolutely not. Inside, she finished the sentence. I only threw a little bait in the water. Days earlier, she'd had a conversation with Jack. The opera singer Camilla, she'd said. He'd gone still. Watching him freeze, she'd let something slip. She'd heard that singer was meeting someone privately. Surely not, he'd said, and immediately denied it. Her refusal to answer set him off. He'd turned to Axie, too. Camilla is seeing someone? There's a rumor like that? Hooked. Camilla, the celebrated opera singer, a famous commoner, was soon caught in an affair scandal with a noble. Lumina had the whole file in her head. Exactly as predicted, Jack followed Camilla and discovered her lover was tied to black magic research. The first time around, a reporter with a conscience investigated it, and it ended badly for him, because high nobles were involved. But this time it would be Jack who got destroyed. She speared a piece of meat. This is what a complete ending looks like. She took the bite. Endymion watched her without a word. The longer he looked, the less he could read, so he gave up and looked at his plate. I have no idea what my sister is thinking. Watching her enjoy dinner, his thoughts crowded. It shocked me that she married without saying a word, but it isn't mine to stop since I'm only a half-brother. But if anything ever happens that hurts her, I will be the one standing in front of her. And for that, he'd need enough strength to face a ducal house. Lumina finally noticed he hadn't eaten anything. He was still deep in it. until every last debt is paid. She looked at him and smiled, indulgent. I hope I become a brother who is useful to her, Endymion decided. Weeks later, the entrance results came, and Endymion had passed comfortably. Accepted to Nezuro Academy, Lumina announced it at full volume. At the estate, before he left for enrollment, his sister gave her last instructions. He shouldn't be obsessed with studying. He should make as many friends as he could, and use this to widen his world. She meant every word of it. He took it in, then spoke first for once. There was something he wanted to ask. Had she hurt her that day? The disaster came back. Her father and stepmother dead. Endymion's leg crushed. It was the first time since the funeral he had mentioned the accident directly. She chose not to answer. Did something happen that day? He looked at her without blinking and understood she wouldn't say. When no answer came, he turned toward the door. Nothing. He was only asking. He'd go now. She stared after him. That's it? That's how it ends? Then she sank into it. It isn't necessary to hand him memories that aren't good. Eventually, she stopped thinking about it and waved him off with one last thing. She'd write to him. And if anything happened, he was to write back. Endymion pulled a face and said nothing. Then he agreed anyway. The bear he'd called childish went into his hand luggage. 2 weeks later, at the ducal manor, Lumina swept into the study in a gorgeous dress with ribbons in her hair and announced herself. Father, I'm here. The words stopped Lucius mid-sentence. Even the eyes hidden behind the dark lenses went wide. Every servant present froze. Father. What formed in their heads was a rabbit hopping up to a black panther and calling it father. Where Lumina went, Axie followed. He bowed instead of speaking. She was still beaming as she ran to Lucius, asking whether he'd been well, whether anything had happened. Halfway there, she faltered and looked worried. Was that too familiar? Should she have said, Your Grace? Not at all, he said. He pressed a hand to his temple and thought it through. Legally, she was married to Karajan, so calling him father was entirely correct. The servants exchanged looks, astonished. If anything, his grace looks pleased. The panther and the white rabbit came back to mind, except now the panther was letting the rabbit roll around on its back. She was halfway down the hall when he stopped her. She waited to hear it. He came up behind her. Finding her way back to her room would be difficult. He would take her there. And he lifted her off the floor without effort. She came back to herself and jumped. She knew where it was. Not that one, he said. A different room. He brought her to a set of rooms, and Olivia began the tour. As the young lord's wife, she'd been given new quarters. This was the sitting room. Through there, the bedroom, and it was luxurious enough to hurt. From the balcony, Olivia went on. She could look over the garden and take her tea. And through here, the dressing room. Lumina cut her off. Wait. She would like to live somewhere other than this. Her face said the rest. This isn't a room, it's a house. Lucius misread her entirely, looked around and concluded that it was indeed too small. She started to agree and caught herself. Before she could recover, he was giving orders. Olivia, call the builders. Today, they'd take the wall out and make it one room. What is he saying now? She turned to Olivia in hope. There's a room on this floor where the previous duke kept his art, Olivia offered. Yes, Olivia. Object. Object, now. Olivia agreed cheerfully that it should be fine. Lumina had nothing left, not you two. Seeing they meant it, she stopped them. No, that wasn't it. It was simply far too large for a person like her. Lucius caught the phrase and turned it around. A person like her. Meaning what exactly? A person who can barely restrain her own appetite for luxury? She looked around the beautifully made room and something nameless rose in her. But once I get used to places like this, the greedy life I had last time might come back. She saw herself in it again, drowned in liquor and cards. And in the heat of it, she said what she wanted. Darker, narrower, less light. Something like an attic, with dust and insects in the corners. Lucius went very still. She was more used to a place like that, she nearly shouted, and the air after she described her dream room turned heavy. By the time she realized it was far too late, that was too much. It's worse in here than it was a minute ago. Lucius gave her a reason she couldn't refuse. This was the room she and Karajan would share. With eyes on them outside, shouldn't they be in one room? And if the daughter-in-law of House Hurt lived in something like an attic, she would be looked down on. Her eyes went round. When she had nothing left, he simply ordered it. So use it. Sitting out on that beautiful balcony, looking back into the extravagant bedroom, she surrendered. If the Duke puts it that way, there's nothing to be done. I genuinely have no choice, so I have to use it. She swung her feet and smiled at the tea laid out in front of her. Olivia set the pot down and said her name. There was something she needed to say. Her face was far more serious than usual. Lumina looked at her uneasy. What is it? In the end, she said it. She bowed low and confessed she was Olivia Muniz, vice commander to the Duke, and apologized for hiding it. Lumina looked at the woman still bent over and smiled. Sorry, Olivia. I already knew that. She watched Olivia grow anxious at her silence and assessed her privately. And the fact that she is the one who will soon betray the Duke. I can't see a single place to doubt. How careful does a betrayal have to be? Then a reckless idea arrived. Should I try to win Olivia over? Olivia read her face wrong entirely and said she knew the young madam felt betrayed. Not at all, Lumina said. Vice commander or maid, Olivia was still Olivia. The woman's eyes filled. Then Lumina added one more line that went straight through her. That she only liked the person named Olivia. Overcome, Olivia fumbled something into her hands. Please accept this as an apology. What is it? Lumina asked, already delighted. She turned it over and recognized it. Oh, this is tickets to the opera. A line of noble carriages drew up in front of a building just as splendid. Lucius von Hurt stepped down, absurdly handsome, dark glasses and all. A young lord nearby murmured that it was the Duke of Hurt, wasn't it? A girl gasped, then wondered aloud who he was escorting. Lumina, glowing, announced that they were at the opera house. She turned to Lucius, thrilled, and said watching it with her father would surely be wonderful. Her heart was already going. She remembered taking the ticket from Olivia, the thing she handed me that day. She pictured the whispering around her and confirmed it, part of a very carefully built campaign for public opinion. With that sudden announcement, she'd become the young lord's wife overnight, and the suspicion had certainly landed on her. She walked in beside Lucius. The point is to prove I'm on good terms with the Duke, and lay the ground for the young lord's wife. She glanced back at Olivia and said the name to herself. Olivia Muniz. Olivia smiled back. She is not an incompetent vice commander. Inside, Lumina was still turning it over. He's a monster, so what? She watched the stage. The male lead was a monster, and the woman he loved was human. Their conflict was the whole play. On stage, the man sat miserable, telling Lucy not to look at him, while she went to him and said she loved him. From the box, Lumina watched closely. Edward stammered out her name. He dropped to his knees with his head in his hands. He was hideous, and when he looked at her, he felt hungry. She thought about it. It's simply presenting legends as monsters. Lucius remarked that they seemed to have run out of actors. Lumina asked innocently whether that was so. Olivia explained. The roles had been recast too quickly. Camilla was to play the lead, and she'd been cut over rumors of an affair and black magic. And besides, Olivia added, this play's premise wasn't quite enough, not compared with the parties in His Grace's own love story. Lumina's head came around. What? Her eyes were shining. His Grace's love story? A chance to learn about the Duke and Duchess. Lucius, silent until then, said it was fiction, built out of rumors exaggerated somewhere along the way. Still, she pointed out, it had something to do with him. She said it gently. She wanted to hear his story. He turned toward her, which surprised her. Because he was looking directly at her and she couldn't say anything at all. His eyes. Even when he wasn't using his power, he said, his eyes looked like that. Which was why ordinary people and legends alike avoided him. He put the glasses back on, but Iris had looked at him and seen him. Lumina flushed and said the Duchess must have been very gentle. He laughed thinly and denied it. There is nobody like that in this world. She had nothing to follow it with, so she looked away. From that expression, pressing further would be difficult. She stood. I have to follow. Lucius asked what was wrong. Then he asked whether the play was that bad. She waved both hands. No, not at all. He read the panic on her and asked whether she was frightened after seeing his eyes. She said far too loudly that she had never thought that, and privately admitted it wasn't the first time she'd seen them. She stalled a moment, then said awkwardly, that anyway. He sat there thinking, I genuinely cannot read her. He remembered the Muniz report on Lumina Lanzi. Brandon had come in, scratching his head, apologizing for being late. However, they investigated, nothing turned up. And Olivia had brought a stack of documents and told him to look. The young madam is innocent. Axie had said, perfectly normal. The boy's voice came back to him. It's a little strange. He sat with all three reports for a long time. She's a strange child, he decided. Meanwhile, Lumina was running in circles outside. She stopped and looked around. She can't have gone far. She's near here somewhere. Then she saw Olivia standing perfectly still ahead of her. Found her. She stopped when Olivia asked what brought the young madam out here. Lumina tilted her head. That's odd. Olivia went on. The play wasn't over yet, so, and Lumina cut across her. You. Her face hardened. Who are you? Olivia played dumb and asked what the young madam meant. If she wasn't Olivia, who would she be? Lumina held her ground. She didn't know, but it wasn't Olivia. Because Olivia was not a legend. Olivia muttered, how would she know that? Then Olivia laughed out loud. Axie said the young madam was a strange person, and he wasn't wrong. The disguise came away, and standing in front of her was Brandon. She shrieked his name and called him uncle. He looked put out and said she could drop the uncle. She glared at him and demanded to know where the real Olivia was. Piled under work at the manor, he said, because she hated leaving things undone. Lumina informed him she hadn't realized he was a pervert and a liar. That landed. He objected immediately. He'd borrowed his wife's face with permission. Pervert and liar was going too far. And there it was. Lumina's whole face changed. Hold on. His wife? She pictured Olivia's face and then Axie's and kept going. Could Olivia's husband and Axie's father be Brandon? Brandon was practically glowing with self-satisfaction. A true shape-shifting genius is not limited by gender. He shifted into Edward to show off. Father, look at this. She gasped. Edward, from the play just now. Then he became Lucy, and she said that name too, delighted. She asked innocently whether that wasn't him. He waved himself back and explained it was a face he'd passed on the street. He watched her reaction and thought it over. She knows absolutely nothing about the doctor's face. A black fluid was running onto the floor. She noticed it too, coming steadily off his hand. What is that? Surely not. She shot up and shouted at him. Uncle! Your hand is melting. Brandon laughed thinly, finally noticed. He brushed at his shoulder. If he pushed everything into his head, he could hold it, but the longer it went, the more the face melted through. She was already moving, worried. She'd fetch her father right now. He scrambled to stop her. Wait. If the captain finds out, I'm dead. She stared. Was her father cold enough to kill his own man over something like this? He sat down heavily and asked whether she could see it, though it wasn't worth looking at. He showed her his wrist where a strange magic circle was burned in, proof of being caught up in black magic, which was banned. And if the captain learned what state he was in, he added, he would die. She asked how he knew the restrictions so precisely, because the doctor explained black magic to him personally. He told her the story. When he came to himself, that day, as usual, he'd been carrying out the captain's orders. Someone had come up behind him. He remembered noticing a figure in a black hood approaching. He remembered shaking in front of that stranger. When he opened his eyes, there was a familiar smell of medicine and the smell of blood. The man the captain had spent everything hunting was the doctor. The stranger had asked whether he was lucid. This was his escaped test subject. Ah, they call you Brandon now, don't they? The doctor had spoken as though he knew him better than he knew himself. He'd been given a poison, and the research had gone well. If he wanted the antidote, he was to bring back everything the Duke knew about ancient magic. 1 week. If the documents weren't delivered, he could simply die. When Brandon woke again, the doctor was gone. Lumina asked why the man would need that. He had no idea. She put her hands on her hips and demanded to know whether he'd told Olivia any of this. He sighed. How could he possibly tell her? But if it's Olivia, Lumina thought. She remembered how sharp Olivia's eyes were. Even if not now, it's only a matter of time before she notices the signs. And then something landed. Now I understand why Olivia betrays this house. She looked at Brandon sitting there anxious, so that's it. Her face went serious. To save her husband. She crouched by the black fluid on the floor and calculated. A completely unique ability, extremely useful for gathering information. Capable, worthy of the Duke's trust, and devoted to his family. She reached out and touched the liquid. She looked at the soft mass on her fingers. I like Olivia that much. I can't leave this man to die. After a while, she asked whether black magic was only banned, meaning all they had to do was find the antidote within the deadline. He blinked at the question. Well, yes, apparently. Then she said she had a way. He stared. What? He warned her that using her power as a legend would be useless here. What if it went wrong and turned into black magic? She stepped closer. Not that. She leaned down until she was level with his face and asked whether he had money. He managed 2 syllables. She brightened. Excellent. She folded her arms like a gang boss. Then that money. Hand it over. Lucius sat with a paper in his hand and asked whether Lumina had gone out with Brandon. Olivia confirmed it. She remembered how excited the girl had looked. The young madam says she adores the theater. Olivia carried a stack of documents over and continued, and she suggested they go secretly to buy the Duke a present. Secretly, he repeated. Olivia beamed, which is why she asked me not to mention it. Then, she's taken no escort. Brandon is enough, he said. He smiled, quietly happy. A present. I wonder what she'll bring me. Elsewhere, Brandon would not stop complaining. He couldn't believe it, but this was genuinely a slum. He watched Lumina pull a hooded cloak on. Is there really someone here who can undo the doctor's poison? Somewhere unfamiliar, he finally asked where exactly they were. She looked straight ahead, Erica's house. He looked at the collapsing building in front of them and asked whether the owner lived in a thing that would fall over if touched. Correct, she said. She paused, then turned to him, radiant. This is the only place that can save you. To explain Erica, you had to know about a man who was famous in the last life. He was celebrated as a genius of herbal medicine and published paper after paper the Academy took seriously. Then about 6 years later, people who doubted him started a quiet investigation. And the genius they called the Jewel of the Empire turned out to be a fraud who had been stealing his stepdaughter's work. The Empire fought far too late to rescue Erica, but she was already dead because she could not survive what that man did to her. Erica, a cursed genius who never once stood in the light while she lived. If the doctor who poisoned Brandon is called a genius, Lumina thought, then why shouldn't a genius take the title back from him? From inside the house came a shout. Useless girl. The medicine was too strong to use properly. This was not what he asked for. Brandon saw where this was going and moved fast. She opened the door and walked in while he stared. Hello, she called. The famous man had been in the middle of hitting Erica, and her arrival left him standing there with nothing to do. He demanded to know who she was. She looked at him. So this is the stepfather. A fraud and a bad man, she thought, and smiled beautifully. She was a customer. She'd heard medicine was sold here. He shouted that he didn't know where she'd heard such nonsense and she should get out. She explained pleasantly that no, she had come to the right place. She walked past him to Erica. She was here to collect her. Erica stared as Lumina said her name. Then she turned to Brandon and said lightly that she'd leave the rest to him. He got one word out. He remembered the stepfather demanding to know where they were going and then being knocked out cold. Had she only needed him for his money? A person, she said calmly, should be used in the right place. She looked over at Erica, who had no idea what was happening. And more than anything, isn't it better to make a good impression on the person saving you? Then she turned and introduced herself. This must be a shock. Her name was Lumina. Erica answered politely with her own. The girl looked at her, puzzled. Lumina, with no family name? She looks like a noble from every angle. So she asked why she'd come. Lumina brightened. She'd heard a rumor. She'd heard someone was making extraordinary medicine out of low-grade ingredients. Someone named Erica. Standing to one side, Brandon caught it. Hold on. He watched her, curious. How does a girl who spent her life indoors know something that I, working in the dark, do not? She went on cheerfully. She'd come because she had something to ask. She set the terms immediately. 3 days. Exactly. Erica shrank. She was sorry, but she was afraid. Lumina cut in. Don't say that. Hear it to the end. If she accepted, Lumina would make sure she could live off her work. Then she asked, gently, whether Erica had ever thought she didn't want to live like this, hiding inside her own pain. Erica remembered her mother holding her, a slum, because there was no money, using her mother as a shield, hiding that she was a powerless legend. She saw herself standing alone in a corner. The medicines and papers I invented were all taken by my stepfather. She looked straight at Lumina and her eyes changed. I've had all of it. I want out. While she was still somewhere inside that, Lumina asked whether she knew what this was. She was surprised and answered anyway. A slime? In front of her was a black fluid in a small glass case. Security in the slums was terrible, so people met monsters often. The current view held that monsters were simply vile creatures for legends to clear away. But once monster research began properly, that view turned 180 degrees. Lumina remembered Erica standing at a desk buried in paper, because of a thesis written by the girl in front of her. Then she asked whether Erica had ever seen a slime unable to hold its shape. Put plainly, she wanted this slime repaired. Brandon pointed at himself. Am I the slime? She kept negotiating. They would fund her as much as she wanted for 3 days, and if she got results, they'd guarantee her future. Erica fidgeted, but she wondered whether she could really. Lumina cut across her. She could. He scratched his head. How does she say things like that without a shred of doubt? Now even I want to believe her. Lumina took Erica's hands. This offer was the first chance and the last. She didn't hesitate, a chance to stand in the light. Erica stared at her. So her own future, Lumina said gently, was hers to choose. Wheels on stone and Lumina's voice inside the carriage. All he had to do now was wait for good news. Brandon didn't sound convinced. If that girl produced nothing, it would be a waste of money. She pulled a face. Why was he so negative? He raised a hand. Because she kept saying nonsense to him, so he'd stopped hoping. Then she asked whether he'd ever gambled. His eyes opened. Gambling was the same, she said. Nobody knows which card the other is holding, so instead you look at each other and guess the outcome. She smiled, entirely confident. And in a situation where everyone says it can't be done, the higher the stake, the more you take if you win. He listened with his arms folded while she went on. It's the same here. He had nothing left to lose, so he could raise the bet enormously. And she finished it with that beautiful smile. He had become the most frightening man at the table. He laughed bitterly, a child who has never known the way of the cards saying all this. But in the end he agreed. Fine, young madam. And what about the present? She answered with a question of her own. He pointed out that she'd said she was slipping out to buy the captain a gift. He'd told Libby everything. She looked at his untroubled face and got more alarmed. By telling me he told Olivia, isn't he announcing he's running me as a double agent? She gave him a very unimpressed look. He smiled back. Unfortunately, it was late, so shops would be hard to find. She didn't flounder. That, she said, was fine. She smiled again, pink to the cheeks and delighted with herself, because she'd thought of a present she could get immediately. Late that night, inside the manor, Lucius asked whether something had happened at this hour. She beamed at him, glowing with it. Actually, today she'd slipped out behind his back. I already know, he thought, and remembered Olivia's instruction not to say so because Brandon was supposed to be a secret agent. Her voice cut through it. She was so grateful he'd taken her as a daughter-in-law, so she'd thought about a surprise gift. Paper rustled. She couldn't take a photograph, but she had prepared something. She held out a drawing of a man that was frankly hard to look at. This, she said. She went completely blank and produced a strained little smile. He tried again. He had it. A polluted lake. Her face went darker. There is no chance he guesses correctly. She said his title, loudly. He answered without lifting his eyes off the terrible drawing. She looked up at him, apparently holding no grudge about the guesses. She'd drawn him. He had nothing. She winced internally. I knew it would be absurd, but there was no other option. There wasn't time. When he didn't move, she turned away with the picture, clutching it, and said that in that case, her skill clearly wasn't enough to capture how handsome he was. She was mid-fold when he took it out of her hands. He looked almost annoyed as he studied it. Who said he hated it? This was the drawing he was most pleased with. Leave it here and go. Her mouth fell open. He called it a monster. He called it a polluted lake. Lumina, he said, and it pulled her out of her thoughts. She answered. Then he hoped that from now on, whenever she had time, she would give him another present like this one. He hadn't taken his eyes off the page. She was sweating. What is he actually going to do with that terrible drawing? Behind the dark glasses, his ears had gone pink. She took her own hand. It wasn't unreasonable, she supposed. And it wasn't a difficult request. She smiled like a garden opening, and her voice went soft. If her father wanted them, she could give him one any time at all. Olivia sat with her legs crossed. A voice called through the door with a knock. "Olivia, it's me." The door opened and Brandon came in, saying immediately that he'd come because he had something to tell her. He found her buried in paperwork. Darling, shouldn't he be guarding the young madam? Even so, he said he'd come about the young madam anyway. The young madam, he began, remembering it. Lumina had been having her hair done and looked delighted. Family coming up from the country to see Hannah? He kept the smile. It was all thanks to the young madam. The man behind him caught that line. Then Lumina suggested that perhaps she could come along. Yes. What? He fumbled, but she was already glowing. Hannah was always beside her, looking after her, so she wanted to meet them once. So he'd need to go out a while, and he could hire people to play a family. Olivia muttered that he'd never said that when she was the maid. Darling, he said. She rounded on him. Why did the young madam offer that only to him? I want to be the young lady's maid again. Brandon panicked. Darling, calm down. He saw her face and tried to soothe her. The rain had probably made the girl restless. At that age, nobody can sit still. Better to go out on a day like this than sit indoors, he said. The manor was gloomy and the rain kept getting heavier. Olivia folded her arms and said nothing more. He asked how the captain was. As always, she said. When the rain started, he drew the curtains and sat alone with a glass of Calvados. In her room, Lumina was picking out clothes with the maids, and every one of them was smiling at her. Lumina stepped down and Axie took her hand. She thanked him, and beside him Brandon, as Hannah smiled. Then Brandon, walking behind them, said Axie's name. And the voice was nothing like it had been. Axie's head snapped around. That voice. He said it uncertainly. Father. Brandon's face changed, all the cheerful softness gone. That's right, it's me. Axie sweated. So this time he's infiltrated as a maid. He asked whether they weren't on their way to meet his father's family right now. Then Brandon jogged ahead, the gravity dropping off his face like a mask, and called out brightly that he'd lead the way from here. He fell in behind her and leaned down to say his sister would be waiting outside the house. She agreed happily. At a cafe, he said he would make the introductions. He pulled forward a girl who had gone rigid beside him. This is Erica, my sister. Erica produced a paper packet, flustered, and said she'd made a tonic because she worried about her sister. Lumina was thrilled. To have a sister who worries like that. Then she turned to Axie and asked whether, while they talked, he might buy egg tarts from the Pochon bakery. He startled at his name. Lumina held her own face, thinking about them. If you cut slowly through a tart with a scorched top, wouldn't the crust make exactly that sound? She was sparkling now, and her voice went wheedling. They'd come all this way, and Axie was the only one she could ask. He gave in. He walked to the door slowly, uneasy, but he trusted his father. Behind him, Lumina called after him to come straight back. She looked at the packet under the table. Well, Axie's been sent off. Now we can talk properly. Erica looked over, awkward. She'd assumed a noble, and it turned out to be the young madam. If she'd known she was someone so remarkable, Lumina took the sentence off her. Then Erica would have been bowing to her from the first meeting, and she hadn't wanted that. Before she could finish, Lumina clapped and asked how the medicine was coming, whether it had worked. The girl jumped. Yes, the trial on the slime was perfect. That satisfied her completely. If it worked on a slime, it could be applied for real. Hannah was sweating. They're discussing a human being as a monster. Lumina asked Erica to explain the medicine. The substance in the tube had components very like a slime's, she said, and what Lumina told her had narrowed the range. It reacted abnormally when it absorbed the root of a plant called Petunia. The moisture left the body so fast that it couldn't hold shape and began running continuously. She thought about it, which means Brandon is in the same state as something that absorbed Petunia. I did wonder whether it looked like a slime coming apart. In her last life, around this time, slimes began melting across the continent, and the Doomsday people went as far as calling it the end of humanity. And it was in the last life that Erica made her name in the academy, by proving the melting scientifically. Of course, the paper was published under her stepfather's name. She looked at Brandon. In the last life, he researched poisons that occur when humans ingest something, which is exactly why he never found the poison, or the cure. She gathered the packet off the table. Erica must have worked all night. Thank you. Erica said the support had given her the happiest days of her life. Then Lumina changed how she addressed her. In that case, she said, her older sister would be very pleased. The girl jumped. Sister? Lumina flushed, thoroughly enjoying it. Yes. Weren't they close now? Erica stared while she said it seriously. She would let her sister do the research she loved for the rest of her life. Then her voice went hard. If the stepfather was holding on to her, say so, and Lumina's side would handle it. Brandon sweated. She spends too much time around the captain. Erica suddenly dropped her head, pink-faced, and said that as for the stepfather, she had decided not to see her mother anymore. Outside, the sky had cleared. The day the Knights took the stepfather away, she'd talked with her mother, and her mother said she didn't need a husband who beat her daughter. Lumina lit up. Good. Then she'd have a laboratory prepared immediately. She raised a finger. However well things went later, the commission came first. Erica bowed and thanked her for trusting her despite her limits. If I build a talent like Erica on my side first, nothing later is impossible. Rain on the awning. Lumina and Brandon stood outside the cafe. She looked at the sky. The future keeps changing. Erica will never be called the unlucky genius now, and I won't die young. With the settlement the Duke would pay on divorce, she could eat well for the rest of her life. But, most of all, the relatives. They were quiet now, but one day they would show what they were. Every choice she made became a butterfly's wing, and she couldn't predict any of it. This is not the moment to show every card in my hand. So to have the strength for a complete revenge, she turned toward Brandon, who was carrying the bags. She would need a little help from this man. She adjusted the umbrella and said his name. She had a favor to ask. Anything, young madam. She'd make a rhyme, she said. 2 syllables, and he'd answer on the beat. He stared. A rhyme. She held the packet of medicine up in front of him. Excellent. If he was still alive after drinking this antidote, he would become her subordinate. She looked up at him, smiling. Yes, just like he did for the Duke. Easy and simple, wasn't it? If he refused, he asked, did that mean no medicine? Not at all, she said. The medicine was his. She held it against her chest. She didn't threaten people that cheaply. That was not the relationship she wanted. She raised a finger and said it seriously. What she wanted was someone capable who would not betray her. He laughed bitterly, so she wanted him doubled. She nodded. Yes, though it was no different from now. Her smile went wicked. Until now, a standing order stopped him reporting her to her father. From now on, he'd simply be her hands as well. She put a hand to her chest. He needn't worry. She had no intention of betraying her father or stealing his secrets. Until now, the world sees a child. With Brandon, I can move freely. He'd been meaning to ask about the name Calvados from the start, and then something turned over in him and he shook. The luggage dropped out of his hand. He got the words out through his teeth. Out of time already? She came closer. If anything, that was good news. Nothing proved a medicine worked like taking it while you were actually sick. Erica had said that when she tested the slime, it recovered the moment it drank. She hoped he'd recover just as fast. She said suddenly that Axie was coming. Even in that state, the name made him flinch. She watched the boy approach and kept going. He didn't want his son seeing him like that, did he? So drink it quickly. And if the medicine didn't work? He had 2 days until the appointment, she said, and no time to find another cure. So they decided today. She opened the packet. Since the medicine worked, afterward he could decide for himself. Betray her father, or die. Either way, the worst case was unavoidable, so why keep hesitating? He laughed into his hands. She held the vial out. She'd told him already. The less you have to lose, the higher you can bet. Her smile changed. Her eyes went wide and bright and sharp. You only live once, after all. Have some confidence. Axie came back holding the pastry box and started to hand it over. She told him she was giving him all of the egg tarts. He blinked. But she'd said she wanted them, he said. She raised an eyebrow and explained she'd eaten too many other desserts already. He glanced at Brandon, sitting in the corner. In any case, his father's condition was extremely strange. He asked why that maid was sitting down. She pulled a sympathetic face and said Hannah seemed emotional after finally seeing her sister. Watching him, she thought, so it failed. Perhaps it was a medicine that didn't suit Brandon. His condition was so good that she nearly jumped with relief, so it worked. She asked whether Hannah was all right now. She opened her umbrella and something behind it began to glow. Axie's brows went up. Young madam. He asked what the light coming off her was. She covered the necklace with her hand. Oh, this is... The light flared hard enough to startle her. Don't tell me! A voice went through her head. From now on, whenever that boy needs you, you are the first person he finds. Then she was standing in a street, looking around, thoroughly confused. An alley. She was sweating. My lord, can you hear me? His head was down, and there were cuts on his face from somewhere. He shot her an irritated look and told her to stop. She sat down, relieved. He was lucid, at least. She watched him wipe at a cut. That temperament of his. Covered in injuries. Did he pick a fight? She frowned. A legend, getting beaten. If he'd wanted to, she said, he could level this entire district. So why let this happen? The Duke, she asked. Yes, he said. The rain came harder and his voice underneath it. It was raining and my mother was standing in front of me in his hands. She cut in. If it was hard, he needn't tell her. It wasn't a memory anyone needed. He put his face in his hands, but it came back whenever it rained. She had put her umbrella over him. It's all right, she said, and her voice was warm. Come home with me, my lord. He looked up at her and went blank. You really are the same. She didn't follow. The same as what? Did he mean the person who helped him the day of the massacre? He flinched, eyes locked on her. He asked how she knew that. It stopped her. She smiled awkwardly and tilted her head. She'd happened to overhear it. Bringing up the Duke here would be a poor choice. Then something occurred to her and she reached out. She laid a hand against his cheek where the shallow cuts were still bleeding. He still had a fever. His face went red as a tomato. He slapped her hand away and demanded to know what she was doing. She missed the panic entirely and said he was warm. She said seriously that she'd treat him the same way as last time. He hesitated. Last time. Surely not. He said it loudly. She passed out that day. She took his hand to steady him. Not today. Today would be fine. She smiled and told him to trust her. Back then I didn't know my limits. Since then I've used it on no one, and I've eaten and slept well in a duke's house. Which means it's time to pay for the meals. She closed both hands around his, shut her eyes, and pulled his wounds onto herself. The legend wings came out and everything around her blurred and lurched. Ah, here it is again. The pain hit her from the inside. Her stomach turned and something dragged her down like a black swamp. She was shaking and then she felt something else. Like a cold hand closing around her heart. He saw the strength go out of her and shouted, There it is. Let go. Now. She didn't. She would not. The pain brought tears to the corners of her eyes. He panicked. If it hurt enough to cry, stop. She gripped harder and said no. She shut her eyes and set her teeth against it. Just endure it. She thought about the contract. If she couldn't treat him, the whole arrangement ended. She opened her eyes a crack and looked at his frightened face. How does he walk around like nothing is wrong, living inside pain like this? The light off her grew brighter. Maybe he's like me. Maybe he simply went numb to it. She dropped into his arms and his face came apart. Your wounds, she was mumbling. My lord. Don't be in pain anymore. It stopped him completely. She couldn't hold on. Her eyes closed and her breathing went shallow and she got out one more thing. Wherever you go, don't fight. The rain blurred everything and the world went quiet except the water and one voice saying her name. At the manor, servants were wringing cloths out over 2 buckets, and one of them asked whether the Duke was still in his room. She hadn't finished when the front doors banged open. All 3 turned and saw Karajan carrying Lumina in his arms, and the silence that dropped was frightening. The maid managed his name. He stood there with her unconscious against him, gripping her shoulder, and gave the order. Get a doctor. Now. This is the first time I've come to that man's rooms on my own 2 feet. I told myself 100 times I would never come back here. In the room, he looked at her sleeping, because it is where the man I refuse to call father lives. Everything in him was as cold and as loud as the rain outside. He watched her breathe. After I realized my wound had transferred to this girl whole, the only place I could think of was the ducal manor. The place I hate most is the only one that can help. His hand closed, humiliating and painful. He remembered storming in to confront his father. He had slammed the desk and demanded to know who the girl using strange magic actually was. "It isn't magic," Lucius had said calmly. "She's a healing legend. She'll be useful to you, so keep her close." That answer had emptied him out. Then he thought further. If a healing ability that never existed before is only the transfer of the wound onto the person who does it, he hesitated, then brushed the cut on her cheek. Every bit of pain I've carried has been moved onto Lumina. She knew that, felt it directly, and married him anyway. He pulled his hand back. "What exactly do you like about me that much?" Deep under, she said a name. It startled him. "Endymion." "Why are you like this?" She frowned in her sleep. He watched her, still half gone, saying another boy's name. "Endymion? Who is Endymion? What did that brat do to you? What is he to you?" "Surely not." His hands shook where they rested on the bed frame. "Surely that isn't the name of a boy she used to like?" In noble society, marriage talks began even younger. He was already picturing a young nobleman and a stack of proposals on a desk. And since she knew nothing of the world, she'd have agreed because she couldn't say no. He pictured the nobleman offering her his hand on a green lawn. His face had gone completely dark and he had never been angrier. Then he caught himself. Why am I angry? Where did this mood come from? He made a fist to hold it down and stood watching her. She coughed hard and a small white flower came out of her mouth. He looked at the white petals and the yellow center. A flower? Lumina lay there exhausted and turned her head to the window. "It's night already?" Karajan was still sitting beside her and told her not to think about getting up. She touched the wet cloth on her forehead and asked about the fever. He looked at her coldly and asked whether she didn't know the state of her own body. She sat up anyway. He asked what exactly her ability was, since her own wounds didn't heal quickly. She sighed. Normally, she didn't pass out. He was a special case. He cut across her, obviously. She'd taken his wounds. She couldn't hide it now. She asked quietly whether he'd seen. Exactly as expected, he went off. Seen? She was crying from the pain and she said it like that? She looked at the expression on him and had nothing. Why is he this angry? To Karajan, I am not only a device for dealing with a persistent suitor named Araben, not a tool that can be treated without feeling anything, so that transferring a wound is fine. She turned to him and asked whether he was worried. That surprised him. She folded the cloth and let it out. Of course he was. Wasn't he sitting here at this hour because he was worried about her? This is the first time anyone has put a cloth on my head when I was hurting. She smiled at him brilliantly. She was curious how he felt about it, but honestly, he was very cold about it. He turned away and asked what she was smiling at. It was so endearing she smiled harder and said she liked that he stayed beside her when she hurt. Thank you. He opened his hand and held a small white flower out to her. More importantly, would she tell him what this was? She looked at it and asked what flower it was. A beautiful small white flower, he said. She threw it up. His face was severe. A young lord of good name does not put flowers in his mouth because he's hungry. Do people generally do that? She stared. No. She'd brought up more than one, he added, so he'd given the rest to the doctor. Unless the man was a fraud, he'd find the problem. Finally, he told her to rest while he called the doctor. She pointed out it was the middle of the night. And doctors have to sleep to stay alive. She looked up at him and patted the space beside her. First, he should lie down next to her. He made a strangled sound. Sleep first, she added, and think afterward. That emptied him completely. Later, the lamp was out, and he said he genuinely did not understand why he had to lie here. Because he looked tired, she said. Sleep first, think after. His face darkened, and he covered it with an arm. Lumina smiled weakly. If I could give him his own room, I would. But the Duke had rearranged their quarters, and now this was the only room Karajan had. She remembered Lucius saying, entirely seriously, that this was the room she and Karajan would share. She had gone numb. "Who is Endymion?" He asked it to break the silence, and the name made her jump. She looked at him, lost. Why is that name coming up here? The two of them didn't get on, so there was no way he'd been told any of it. She propped her chin on her hand and thought, that brat is a bad person, isn't he? Someone who hit her or something. It came out of nowhere and floored her. She denied it immediately. Nothing of the sort. He was a good person. A good person, he repeated. Surely not someone she liked. He was scowling now. She smiled brightly and answered without hesitating. Yes, exactly. Of course. Was liking two people at once in House Lancy a matter of course? Then she raised a finger and said, seriously, that Endymion was her younger brother. He put her back down and said, lie down, the fever hasn't broken. She blinked up at him. What was that? Color spread across someone's face, and he muttered that she knew his name. She said she liked him and didn't know the name of the boy she liked. Of course she knew it, she said. His name was Karajan von Hurt. The people of House Hurt had been healthy generation after generation and did not get sick, so neither would she. Don't get sick without my permission. It came out of him from somewhere real, and afterward he looked easier for it. She watched the whole thing happen and couldn't look away. Ah, he's gone completely red. He lay down, turned away, and told her gruffly to stop making noise and rest. She kept looking at him. I thought this the first time we met. He is a deeply dishonest person. The one running hotter than me right now is him? She laughed to herself. Cold outside, warm inside, and pays far too much attention to other people. The next morning the rain hadn't quite stopped, but the sky had gone bluer. The noise pulled Karajan up out of it, and he opened his eyes slowly. Morning already. Did I fall asleep? He turned and looked at Lumina beside him, still under, breathing evenly. He watched her, unable to say anything. I don't believe this. Since my mother died, have I ever slept that well? She's a child, and she's a child I have to worry about. The longer he looked, the redder he got. The rain finally stopped, and outside the castle brightened, far better than the day before. It had healed a great deal, and there was no visible wound. She only needed to rest and recover, the doctor concluded. Karajan needled her, unconscious an absurdly long time over something like that. She had no defense and scratched her head. She'd always slept a lot. He didn't want to argue with a patient, so he told a servant she was hungry enough to eat flowers off the ground, and a meal should come quickly. Lumina puffed her cheeks out. I have never eaten anything like a flower. She thought about the one he'd shown her last night. Even the shape was perfectly intact. He'd heard that her being a legend was a secret even the imperial family didn't know. When she didn't answer, he pressed. What happened if someone found out and took her? Why hadn't she registered? She smiled easily at that, because Karajan would help her. He got a hand over his red face and stammered that there was no reason he'd help her, and that he did not like her at all. She was Karajan's wife, she said, swinging her feet into her slippers. He panicked when she stood. Wasn't she afraid of snapping an ankle? She walked off calmly and said everyone here thought she was made of porcelain. She pulled the curtain back to let the morning in and changed the subject. The air in here was stifling. Then something caught her and her eyes went wide. She turned to Karajan delighted and told him to come and look. He asked what was out there. A rainbow, small but as clean as a painting over a washed and gleaming landscape. He said flatly that it was only a rainbow. She disagreed. Only? It was beautiful, and it could only be seen right now. She put a hand on the sill. Even when the black clouds cover it, the fact that the sky behind them is blue does not change. The dark is only ever a short moment. She breathed the cool air in with her eyes half closed. Then she turned to face him and asked whether it wasn't beautiful. His heart went wrong and his eyes stayed on her. In the end, all he managed was that yes, it was beautiful. In a closed room elsewhere, a voice reported that the rain had stopped, Captain. Lucius sat with a glass in his hand, not looking over, and said he knew. Brandon waited, then said he'd come to talk about the young madam. At her name, Lucius lifted his eyes. Had Lumina found something? Brandon answered evenly. He had been watching from beside her the entire time, and she had no connection to the doctor at all. Lucius stood, and he was certain because Brandon didn't make him wait. He had shown her the doctor's face, and she recognized nothing. He knew as well as anyone that a legend with an ability that rare was exactly what the doctor prized. And if that man ever learned what the girl could do, there was no telling whether he'd do something as insane as 6 years ago. Then he would do something equally insane to keep her. Lucius's expression never changed. The doctor was a man who had lost his mind over legends. 6 years ago, he abducted Iris and Karajan. Iris ended up in his hands, because she happened to be with Karajan at the time, even though she was only an ordinary human being. When I think about that stretch of time, the heart I believed I did not have. "Captain," Brandon said, cutting the thought. He had something to report. Lucius didn't move. "Go on." He lowered his head. The two children had held a binding ceremony using ancient magic. It seemed to have taken. He'd stepped outside and the young madam vanished, so she had presumably gone straight to Karajan. He remembered Karajan running into the castle carrying her, out of breath from the hurry. Both children were home now. Brandon remembered Karajan bristling like an angry kitten and had to fight his own mouth. Karajan was not merely fine, but positively full of energy. Well, Lumina had collapsed again, so Karajan carried her in. She was all right now. It seemed that using the power put her body under enormous strain. "Brandon," Lucius said mildly, "fetch Olivia." Karajan stood with his arms folded and asked what exactly she was saying. This was his room. "Not quite," she countered. Precisely speaking, it was Karajan's room and hers. She pointed at him, smiling. "Our room." He looked away, embarrassed, and asked how it had come to this. She hesitated, then said easily that it was because they were married. Anyway, the bed was large, so she didn't mind. He was welcome to sleep in it. The bed in question was enormous. And, she added with devastating logic, they'd slept together last night anyway. He went red to the ears. No, that was... A knock came at the door, and a voice asked whether she could come in. Still flushed, Karajan turned to the door and asked who came at this hour. Lumina could guess. Hannah had spoken first. It was time for the young madam to change, so would the young lord be staying? He turned to Stone. Wouldn't almost anyone leave obediently? Lumina coughed. What maid, she asked, would look at a young lord like that? Footsteps came in, and she addressed the newcomer. Wasn't it the case that he had absolutely no intention of hiding what he was? She thought it over. If Brandon deliberately came to talk at this hour, there was only one reason. The doctor's deadline for him ran out today. At midnight, Brandon's fate would be decided. He stood there and remarked that, thinking about it, she had vanished outdoors earlier. She remembered that only 2 people close to Lucius knew about the pact between her and the Duke. Brandon went on. The boy was quiet and didn't show much, so she should simply tell him next time. She said she would. Axie, he said, was the second treasure of his life. She was curious. And the first? He laughed. Olivia, obviously. He drifted back somewhere far off and said the day she confessed to him still felt like yesterday. Would the young madam believe it? He'd confessed without a single other person present. There is nobody in this world happier than me. The face of the woman he loved came up, smiling. He got slowly to his feet. If he died, wouldn't she be sad? His eyes dropped and the voice went quiet. I don't want to make her sad. Not for a moment. Ah, Lumina thought. Brandon genuinely loves his family. She remembered it all. The doctor's poison, how close it came, and how Erica's medicine had succeeded in slowing the symptoms. He looked like a man accepting it calmly. He wanted to live and stay with his family. The doctor's extension expired today. Except this time the situation was not the last life, where all he could do was die helplessly. She thought about it. It's a piece of luck that there's a chance to save Brandon at all. The clock ticked through the seconds and the minutes, and then it struck midnight. She broke into a wide smile and said that he wouldn't be taking Olivia's tears from her after all. He looked at her. That's right, I lost. Then he declared it. Lumina, I'll be your servant. He stepped forward and offered his terms. In exchange, he would never betray the captain. She asked whether he loved her father very much. He leaned a hand on the chair and told her the doctor had abducted him as a child because his ability was unusual. He sat down beside her and finished it. The person who pulled him out of that hell was the captain. He remembered the hand that lifted him up that day and the words that came with it. So he could never betray the captain. She looked over, and he told her to be careful of the doctor. The man was insane about legends, and if he ever learned what she was, she would certainly be hunted. He looked straight at her. The young madam did not want to be experimented on while still alive, did she? She nodded, frightened. His face changed. If she ever saw this face, she was to run, whatever it cost. At the palace of Lembrena, the sun was everywhere again. A voice called out, "Brother!" Purple heels came clicking down the corridor. "Brother!" A girl with long white hair, half of it tied with a single neat ribbon, asked whether he was feeling better. Inside the room, a young man sat reading. This was the second prince, Elios Lembrena. He looked up from his book, pleased. "Ben, you've come." Araben rushed over, took the book out of his hands, and told him this was no time for reading. Karajan had suddenly married. What was the girl's name? A child of a house she'd never heard of. Did that make sense? Elios remarked that the boy she liked had married, so she must be heartbroken. She bristled and demanded to know what he was talking about. He made a small sound and asked, in that case, why she was so angry. Her answer genuinely bewildered him, because he was very high class. Then she declared it. She, Araben von Lembrena, was going to marry that boy. And instead, he had married someone from nowhere, and she absolutely would not accept it. There was no denying one thing about Araben. If she wanted something, she got it. She announced that the sole heir of House Hurt, a legend, and who could have imagined a child like a lump of rice cake would take all of it? Elios laughed and said even their father had permitted the marriage. How was anyone supposed to reverse it? That set her off about their father, too. Their father had tried to summon the Duke of Hurt, and then, on seeing the man's face, had been unable to say anything at all. Elios let her talk. Their father had asked why anyone would interfere in a private matter. However great the Duke was, he wasn't the emperor. So why behave like that? Araben, Elios said, and she stopped. The Duke of Hurt commanded many legends, and he was the cold-blooded man who killed his own father and his wife. A legend who treats human lives as weeds, so their father had to be careful too. She insisted the business about his wife was only a rumor. Elios disagreed. It was not a false one. Then she asked whether he'd spoken to Marcel and got angry immediately. Did he know what Marcel said the moment he heard? She repeated it. Is the Duke of Hurt truly the only suitable match for you? You're still young, so enjoy the time first. She slammed a hand on the chair. That was what he said, though he wasn't stupid enough to go further. Then something crossed her eyes. Whereas her second brother, Elios looked at her and said that if Ben was that unhappy, he'd think of something. The warmth in it delighted her. This is exactly what I love about him. After an accident, Elios had been left disabled. So it was only natural that his standing as a prince collapsed. Even so, Araben admired Elios enormously because he spoke to her, a legend, the way he'd speak to an ordinary person. He coughed a few times and said there was certainly something strange about it. She asked what he meant. The young lord was still barely an adolescent, he pointed out. There was no reason to rush a marriage like that. Her head nearly came apart. Exactly. It made no sense. Of course, the girl was bold and rather sweet, but that was all. He watched her expression, curious. Then he asked what the name of the person who married the young Lord Hurt actually was. She rattled it off without hesitating. Lumina, something, Lancy. He turned back to her. Ben. She still didn't know much about that child. She blinked. And? So, he suggested, what if she kept the girl close by? Karajan stopped trying to escape, which was probably why they kept running into each other at home. He held a flower out to her and told her to take it. She took it with a stiff little smile. He does things like this out of nowhere. She asked why the sudden flower. He said, expressionless, that he'd picked it up. Picked it up. Beside her, a servant bowed slightly and mentioned that it was a flower from the Duke's own garden. Now that she thought about it, everything was in bloom. She brightened. Really? She wanted to see. The servant answered quickly that since the young madam had recovered so well, perhaps she'd like a walk. She lit up. Could she? Of course, the servant said, smiling. She'd get her ready to go out. Outside, Lumina could not stop exclaiming over the place. Going out is wonderful. The flowers smell sweet, and it puts me in a better mood. She glanced behind her. He pretends to be a stranger and pays enormous attention. Following me like that, he clearly wants to walk together. Karajan was like a stray cat. She looked at the flowers nearby. Like right now, he could just ask me to walk with him. A while later, she looked at him and considered it. Perhaps even if I pretend we're acquainted. So she leaned out and said that while she was asleep, he'd gone to look at the flowers alone. Why not wake her and go out together? A thought went through her. Nursing a patient, looking at flowers, he's far gentler than he looks. Then he asked what nonsense she was talking, and it stopped her. He had his arms crossed and said he'd come to check whether she was eating flowers. Definitely a legend. Legends have no feelings. She walked over and said that she didn't eat things like flowers, but she reached up and pulled something off the stem. Instead, she could eat this. That startled him. What is that? She lifted it to her mouth. You can eat it. Then he shouted that she said she didn't eat them and she was eating them. Not at all, she said. She was only drinking the nectar. She put a flower to his mouth and told him to try it. Then he caught the scent of it and went red without meaning to. Why do I keep doing whatever she asks? She waited eagerly and asked whether it tasted like honey. He said nothing and privately admitted the sweetness wasn't bad. But then he pressed her eating flowers to this extent. He lowered his head and asked whether her house was that poor. Then she answered without hesitating. Yes. He pointed at her and said that ordinarily nobles do not put flowers in their mouths. Rich or not, she said. All she knew was that she'd eaten them a few times as a child. He countered that she was still a child now. Then she started telling it. Back when she was smaller than this, while her stepmother was still alive. Lumina, you've been lying again today, haven't you? The child had sobbed. She was sorry. She was sorry. My stepmother would find fault in the smallest things. Then she ordered a servant to bring the punishment, and the servant obeyed because there was no choice. And, she added, no one was to give Lumina anything at all today. A day without food was nothing special. It was a night I spent curled up with my teeth clenched, holding out against the cold and the hunger. She was drifting off again when she caught a faint scent and recognized it. Something sweet. She got up and went to the window to see where it came from. Below her were flowers in every color, and she nearly shouted with it. When a person is hungry enough, she pulled the blossoms and drank them with her eyes streaming, and it was so sweet it made the tears come harder. Coming back out of the memory left her quiet. Tasting it now, it isn't especially sweet. Karajan hated his father, and the ducal manor was where Lucius lived. So she turned around and said, lightly, that she could understand him. That got his attention. She kept walking. She'd had someone like that. On the edge of death, she hated that person so much she couldn't close her eyes. Then she finished it. Misunderstanding or not, she said, I didn't like it. She went quiet again. To me, Lucius is someone I can trust. Asking them to close the distance between them was not written anywhere in the contract. She turned back and told him one thing. Stop getting into fights. Then she pressed. Who gave him those wounds last time? What kind of legend gets beaten by everyone? He listened to the complaint and could only sigh. Unbelievable. He remembered her half-conscious and mumbling, Wherever you go, don't fight. She said exactly the same thing when she wasn't lucid. Then he told her that without his permission, she was not to get into fights either. His eyes sharpened. Yes, the first time she used her power, he saw wounds all over her. Who was hitting her at home? His hand closed. If that was why she was afraid to go back to her own house, she was to tell him honestly. His look got harder and he asked who it was, because catching the man and taking him apart limb by limb still wouldn't be enough. She answered that those were his wounds, transferred to her when she used the power. Then he went red. So the culprit is me? The reaction made her laugh out loud, and she said that apparently the young lord did know how to be embarrassed. Then she told him not to worry about her, and she declared it. If there ever came a time when no one else could help him, he was to remember her. She smiled beautifully, because then she would come immediately. After the walk in the garden, she spent the afternoon with Karajan as usual, the two of them sitting over tea until he said, so she had no intention of divorcing him immediately. I have no idea what he's thinking, but every time I come here, an entire army materializes from somewhere. Divorce, she repeated. He didn't hesitate. Yes, she knew they'd divorce as adults anyway. And, she said? His answer was extraordinary, but he wanted her out of this house immediately. That stopped her cold. Legally speaking, he added, he would overturn the imperial family, so she needn't worry about it. Her eyes went wide and she prayed, No, no, no. At this rate, I'm going to be thrown out. An early divorce meant a failed contract, which meant no settlement. No divorce, not happening, not ever. Not if she had to die first. She glared at him and demanded that he never mention divorce again. Ever, did he understand? Karajan was genuinely thrown by how fierce she'd gotten. He stood up to match her. Listen, set aside the legal question of whether they could divorce right now. But he honestly believed that man could kill her, and not only now, tomorrow, just as easily. He snapped at her. He'd warned her over and over. Why wouldn't she listen? Because if we divorce, I don't get paid, she thought, and told him warmly that it was because she liked him. He put a hand under his chin and asked what exactly she liked about him. Her stomach dropped. He's suspicious. He asked what that was for. She turned her sharp little face away. What am I supposed to say? If I say I love his personality, he'll believe it even harder. He got there first and asked whether, if a better-looking man appeared, she would divorce him and marry that one. She froze. Excuse me? She stood up slowly. Surely he already knew. Then she went for the honey. They say love makes the world glitter, and the moment she met him, the whole world brightened. So would she ever want to part from him? I am an idiot who knows nothing but love. Then he stepped closer and said quietly that he understood, so she could stop. She smiled and agreed. A maid named Ani rushed in and stammered her title. She asked what the hurry was. Princess Araben had sent someone to the ducal house. Lumina took it and saw the imperial seal on the envelope. Karajan stood. Let's read it together. She opened the card, hosted by Princess Araben. He read it, an invitation to a tea party. Later, in the dressing room, a voice was saying that somehow the dressing room had turned into a secret hideout. Then Brandon Muniz asked her something else. More importantly, she'd accepted the princess's invitation. She had, she said, since they'd meet eventually anyway. Better to settle it moderately at the start, so it caused less trouble later. That was what she said out loud. Privately, she thought, judging by that princess's temperament, this is not a tea party arranged to build a friendship. The upper circles are not kind to newcomers. This was a gathering of young ladies who hadn't debuted. Under the banner of order, the old hands bullied the new and set the ranking. They called it stepping on the seedlings. But they had overlooked one thing. Lumina was not a seedling. Brandon looked at her with an expression hard to name. From everything I've seen so far, hit this child once and she hits back twice. And still underneath it, he was worried. But this was Princess Araben's tea party, and there would not be one person there on Lumina's side. So he asked why she wasn't wearing something new. The Duke had bought her so many new clothes lately that plenty of them were still untried. Then Brandon shouted, "Absolutely not." His face went serious. Clothes like that would not do. Princess Araben's tea party was a battlefield. He told her she had to be dressed as well as possible, or the child of their house wouldn't survive it. She stopped. The child of their house? But he meant her. He was the captain's left hand, and Libby, his love, was the right. He said it from somewhere deep. The young madam was now both family to the Duke of Hurt and family to the Muniz. She stood in front of him thinking, family. Does he mean that? She gripped her skirt and kept going. I'm family, that's strange. So why is my heart beating this fast and why does it itch? Brandon asked about the flower she'd brought up in her sleep and why it had startled everyone. Nothing, she said. But why was there a flower at all? He explained that he'd quietly taken one and given it to Erica, since Erica was more capable than an ordinary doctor. A capable man, after all. Erica had guessed at the components, he added, but she wasn't certain yet. Erica was on fire about it. She'd been up all night and said she hated being told to rest and having her books taken away. A scholar through and through. Lumina's mouth fell open and something clicked in her head. Her eyes lit up. There's no problem with putting that plan into motion now. I thought it was still early, but Erica's knowledge and appetite are bigger than I estimated. She handed Brandon a slip of paper. Next time, pass this to Erica. It was a note about a medicine she wanted invented. And there was a first assignment, she added, that only he could do. He looked up. My first assignment from the young madam. She needed to borrow a name. Borrow a name? He repeated, disappointed. Yes, so that however much money appeared in a short time, nobody would ask questions. He pointed out that wasn't as hard as she thought, and if she meant to move money, she'd do better asking the captain than him. Laundering was the captain's specialty. No, she said immediately. She would earn her own money with nothing to do with House Lancey. The Lancey money would be in Daimians in a few years. To claim no attachment to the seat and then take the money would be a contradiction. She thought about it. Just imagining it is horrifying. Walking in the same footsteps as the person I hate. So she needed a black fund with no visible link to her. Buried whatever it cost, since she meant to work under that name. And she'd officially fund Erica through the alias, since she couldn't keep using his money forever. She kept smiling. Of course, he should try not to let anyone suspect a thing, and she'd guarantee him a steady daily wage. He smiled gently at her. Up to this moment, Brandon still did not take that guarantee seriously. While Araben's tea party came closer, she had exhausting work to get through. Brandon had committed to arming her properly. In fact, I haven't seen the Duke's face once since I started sharing a room with Karajan. He must be avoiding me on purpose. Karajan hates his father, so his father stays out of the way to let him be comfortable at home, even a little. Sadly, Karajan knew nothing about that consideration. He asked her why she was wandering around so much lately, when her body still hadn't recovered. He knows and he's asking anyway, she thought, and explained that she had to choose clothes for the tea party. But the princess had invited her. He kept walking. As the young lord's wife, nobody could say a word if she refused. Did that man not teach her even the basics? She laughed weakly. He did. That's exactly why he had me marry Karajan, and gave me enough authority that a princess couldn't grind me down. When Brandon asked the Duke whether she should attend the tea party, unlike his son, it was a perfectly unbothered response. Sitting with Karajan, she said it was because she wanted to go. He looked at her coldly, and his voice went flat. She knew what Araben was, and she wanted to go anyway? If this keeps up, he really will lock me in. Aloud, she said cheerfully that this was the first invitation she'd ever received from someone her own age. Dressing up and going to a tea party was the same thing, so she hadn't wanted to refuse. Privately, if I were only Lumina Lancey, I'd have refused sensibly. But as Lumina von Hurt, it's different. Because the marriage was legally impossible to undo, the princess had summoned her to threaten her. He asked why she had so many firsts. Having a cloth put on her head when she was ill, being invited to a tea party, all of them firsts. That surprised her. Was she really a noble? He asked. He'd heard her house wasn't poor, and yet sometimes she behaved as though she'd been kept locked up somewhere. She had parents, and it was as though she didn't, and because of that she spent her whole life at home with no friends. Then her voice dropped. But Karajan. She was still smiling, and the tone underneath it had gone strange. He didn't need to know things like this, did he? A knock came. Someone from the merchant guild had come for her. The door closed slowly, and Karajan watched it. Just now. Did she draw a line? And he isn't wrong. It had been days since he asked anything about her family, and he had no idea how she lived. Until now, I've been indifferent to anything I didn't need to know. And yet, I can't ignore it. Turn away, close my eyes, and I still see it. That blinding, glittering look. He remembered a meal together and her saying, Karajan, I don't know whether you know this, but when you fall in love, the world starts to glitter. He went red, remembering it. One thing I know for certain, I want to know more. The day of Araben's tea party. Brandon thought, I once had my hometown talking about the work of these hands, but this is the finest thing I have ever made. The maids were thinking the same thing. She's plainly a fairy out of a legend. Look at those cheeks. The only rainfall you'll see in a drought of a house like this. This is genuinely a perfect suit of armor. Then she asked whether they now had several tens of thousands of soldiers. He gave her a thumbs up. Yes, young madam. A maid came in to say it was time to leave, and the carriage had arrived. Axie stood in front of her and said he would be escorting her today. A thought crossed her mind. Karajan still hasn't appeared. He'd been seeking her out to the point of nuisance, and now suddenly there was no sign of him anywhere. He'd opposed her meeting Araben to the very end, so neither of them was likely to be happy about it. At the princess's palace, Lumina was still thinking. I arrived comfortably and with my head up. But at the tea table, a maid came over and asked her to wait a moment, since the princess was busy and would arrive at the appointed hour. It would be one of two things. Either they'd come early and mock her for being late, or come late and laugh at her for waiting. If she objected that the time written on the invitation said otherwise, They'd claim a small clerical error and produce a lie. Power is power. She spoke up. Axie, let's make a bet. He was surprised. A bet? Yes, she said. What time did he think the princess would arrive? As far as he knew, it was the appointed hour now, so she was probably still preparing and would be a little delayed. But she'd come soon. He genuinely believes that. It was nothing like the sharpness of Brandon and Olivia. He's far too guileless. So his vote, she said, was within 10 minutes. She thought the princess would come in an hour. Then her eyes lit. And wouldn't a bet like this be more interesting with money on it? A gentle 1 gold piece, or 10? On an occasion like this, you have to let the reins out a little. She told him the waiting wouldn't be dull anymore. Then she made a request. In exchange, he had to promise her something. Today was the first bet, and the last, because she had a habit of getting addicted to things like this without noticing, so she had to stay alert. He understood. There was an hourglass here, she said. She turned it over. One turn ran about 10 minutes. She looked up at him. If the princess arrived before the sand ran out, but even after the glass ran 5 times, the princess did not appear. Finally, heels on stone and a voice. Oh dear. Arabin arrived with Evelyn and Leah and asked whether the girl had come early. She thought, I've made that brat wait a full hour, so she must be thoroughly miserable by now. Lumina lifted her head slowly, and what showed was a face out of a painting. Arabin had exactly 1 word in her head. She looked at Lumina, smiling brightly in front of her, and ground her teeth. That isn't right. How can she smile like that? Arabin got angrier as Lumina kept smiling. She thinks I'm doubting my own victory. Meanwhile, Lumina was thinking, I'm simply delighted that I won the bet. Back at the tea table, a young lady in a jade dress spoke up. Now that she thought of it, she hadn't introduced herself. She smiled softly. Evelyn Mayer. The one across from her put a hand to her chest. Leah Smith. They said it together. A pleasure to meet Lady Lancey. That landed. Lancey? They talked on. Since she'd married Karajan, surely she was the young madam of Hurt. No lady at a princess's tea party could miss a rule that basic. So the trampling has begun. Evelyn asked whether it wasn't so, since that was what she'd heard. Leah agreed. A wedding was held and not one guest attended. She looked at Lumina's hand and made her point, and there wasn't even a wedding ring. You could bring in someone of any blood and dress them expensively, and they still wouldn't be noble. Evelyn added that bought titles never appeared in the histories. Her face darkened while her mouth stayed pleasant. So the title of young madam is an empty shell. One night at the opera was not enough. She cut into the conversation. She said she hadn't expected to hear talk like this in the imperial palace, of all places. Arabin propped her chin and looked at her, because she and Karajan had married with the emperor's own approval. The ladies were still young, but questioning something His Majesty had recognized might, she thought, become a problem. Her tone cut every sneer out of the room. Or were the ladies displeased that her marriage carried the royal seal? Both of them flinched. She didn't let up. When given the chance, she said, "Say it properly." She frowned. "What's this?" Presumably Princess Arabin told her to call me Lancey. She left Arabin alone and picked up the ring instead. Compared with weddings and rings, surely the important thing was loving each other honestly. Both of them nodded fast, alarmed, and agreed with the young madam of Hurt. Lumina smiled to herself. The name changed instantly. How very sincere. Leah stumbled on. The marriage had been early and completely unexpected. Evelyn joined her. Some said the two of them had used a love potion. Lumina's eyes went wide and she tilted her head. A love potion? She knew nothing about that. Did such a thing actually exist? She smiled brightly. Her father had treated her extremely well, which was how she came to be married at all. She pointed at them without changing her face. If she asked her father, she could clear that up completely. Leah shot up. She spoke with the Duke that intimately? She nodded, remembering him kneeling to swing her up in both arms. Whenever she was bored, she went to his office and he always welcomed her. That merciless demon? She brought it back to the tea. But at gatherings like this, what did people usually talk about? They fumbled. Leah recovered and said they'd normally begin with the day's tea. Tea, as she surely knew, was a basic discipline, and the tea she'd prepared had finally finished steeping. She turned to Lumina politely. The young madam was today's guest, so she should taste it first. Nobody poisons anything at a princess's tea party, she thought. And they can't brew it badly or use cheap leaves because the move would be obvious. Leah smirked to herself. She drank it without a shred of suspicion. The leaves look ordinary and they are unbearably bitter. People said you had to be 50 or 60 before you appreciated what this tea was actually worth. And contrary to everything the three of them expected, she smiled. Venomith, probably from the Len region, fuller and far deeper than anything on the open market. Leah covered her mouth. What? Lumina said confidently, that she'd been genuinely surprised to be served a tea that money could barely buy. Leah picked up her own cup, unable to accept it. How is that possible? Has the tea been switched? It went badly. She coughed hard. It's bitter. Lumina laughed inside. If I'd spat it out, she couldn't have drunk it either. They picked the wrong person because I genuinely love bitter tea. She called her own people over and answered the courtesy. She couldn't very well come empty-handed, so she'd brought a few things. They asked what it was. She stood and looked at the tea caddy. This was a tea she loved. If they could enjoy Venomith, this would suit them too. She was delighted to have found people who shared her taste. She asked what they'd learned from their own teachers. She couldn't give them her teacher's name, since she'd never received lessons deep enough to call anyone that. She remembered the scars on her legs from the beatings after the tutor left. Those lessons went into me like whip marks. Thanks to that, nothing makes me nervous now. She poured for them and they were startled by the color. It's purple. Arabin finally spoke. At their last meeting, she'd been having trouble walking. Was her leg better now? The question turned the table into a black silence. Lumina read the other two. I can feel the ranking here immediately. She smiled. Yes. Thanks to the princess's sincere concern, it seemed to have healed faster. Because the person concerned is Arabin, I can't simply accept a kindness. Look at her right now. That is an ugly little smile. Arabin smiled prettily and said that in that case, from today she could become her personal attendant. Lumina's face went blank. Excuse me? Did she say personal attendant? She understood exactly what it was, which made her ask, why me? Facing the princess and her murky smile, isn't that a declaration of war, keeping me at her side to kill me? Lumina smiled gently and said it was an honor, but she believed it was beyond her. Arabin's brows went up. If it was beyond her, shouldn't she accept immediately? She never even considered that I would say no. The princess went on. Her personal attendant had been Eva, but thanks to Lumina, that post was now vacant. Ava, the attendant who came with her last time. After that incident she'd heard, the woman had been thrown out like a bucket down a well. Honestly, it still galls me. A husband who suited me perfectly, and instead he married a child beneath me. But by imperial law, they cannot divorce immediately. Once I've cut the two of them apart, taking Karajan for myself will also wound her pride. She remembered what Elios had said. Wasn't it enough simply to raise that person's rank? Lumina was in a difficult position. She clearly means no good, and it seems she values this boy Karajan very highly. Once they decide something matters, they will never let it go. So if I keep him next to Lumina, she'll be holding Karajan's weak point. Lumina smiled awkwardly and apologized to the princess for refusing again. Evelyn and Leah rushed in. Princess, what about giving the position to someone who actually wanted it? The princess seemed confused. At that begging, Arabin made a demand. Very well. Let them say her full name. Lumina spoke up with a bright, eager face. Princess. She wanted to try saying the full name, too. She said gently that in fact she'd already received an important assignment from the Duke, and it left her no time, so she had no choice but to refuse. Arabin was thrown. The Duke of Hurt? What assignment? Lumina brightened up considerably. She had to paint. She'd heard the same. Appraisers, for the Duchess's painting, and one glance was said to enchant. Lumina went cold. Surely not the polluted lake. That day she had answered, radiant, that the title was My Most Beloved Father. They kept going. The appraisers had said 5 billion coin, hadn't they? She turned to stone. 5 billion? She could not believe it. There is no possible way a thing I drew is worth that. The Duke must have been standing behind them. Olivia had asked Brandon the same thing. He'd answered that it would be far more entertaining if she found out later. Even being trampled by the imperial family, she'd held on like a weed. Bring up the painting, he'd said, and she'd dodged that position entirely. She rang a small bell. Yes, bring the art supplies here. 5 million coin or 5,000, it didn't matter. Something simple would do. A while later, the painting was finished, and what appeared on that paper could not have been simpler. Arabin could not believe her eyes. Beside her, the other two sat stunned. That skill is what they call 5 billion? I don't know what it is, but she clearly has enormous affection from that demon of a duke. Facing all three, Lumina smiled radiantly while dying of shame inside. I must never admit I drew that. Paper, I'm sorry. She spoke. Her father preferred paintings like that, so she understood the princess would be withdrawing the offer of the attendant position. Honestly, I'd be far more comfortable with Lumina as my attendant, doing what I want. But she has a very large backer, so I have to give ground. Arabin smiled in a way that made her flinch, but there would not be a next time. Arabin could have anything she wanted, at any price, whatever it was. In the gardens of the Emerald Palace, she'd tour the Emerald Gardens and go back to the ducal manor. This is the beautiful place Arabin mentioned. But as long as she didn't enter the palace itself, walking the garden seemed to be permitted. A voice asked whether she could pick it up for him. He'd be grateful. As she could see, moving was inconvenient for him. When she didn't move, he added that it was precious to him, so he would be grateful. She picked it up unhurriedly, aware his eyes had been on her from the start, which is why the request was aimed at me. She carried it over. Elios put out his hand and waited. This was the only handkerchief of its kind in the world, sewn by his sister, so he thanked her. She curtsied lightly. It was an honor to meet the star of the empire. Her name was Lumina von Hurt. He remarked that she'd recognized him immediately. She answered that she'd hardly dare not to recognize a prince. This was a place Arabin still tended now his mother was gone. Here he could feel every season. It was where he came whenever he missed her. That stopped her slightly, I see. He shifted his cane. She said she was Lumina, didn't she? Yes, Your Highness, a lovely name, and it suited her. That startled her. He says things very directly. Since they were going the same way, he offered. Perhaps they could talk. He couldn't talk long as he was. She didn't keep him waiting. She closed her hand and answered quietly that she'd be glad to. Don't get too tense, he explained. People dislike each other because they don't know each other, so he had suggested a tea party where they could talk. Elios said it abruptly. He had no talent for maneuvering, so he'd say it plainly. Wouldn't she become Arabin's friend? It was a sentence designed to leave her nowhere to stand. She went rigid and said nothing for a long moment, then asked him to repeat it. A voice came from behind them, cold enough to be frightening. Are you going to let go? And cut the prince's hand away from hers. The prince's hand went red and his face went blank. Even Lumina hadn't expected it. Is that any way to handle imperial family? Elios closed his hand and said this must be the young Lord of Hurt. Oh no, she thought. Is this their first meeting? She tucked herself behind Karajan and whispered up at him. Karajan, that's the second prince. His attitude didn't move an inch. His voice went flat and cold. Don't go around touching other people's wives. The shock didn't last. He assumed the early marriage was the adult's doing, and the young lord clearly loved his little wife. He'd been hurried and apologized for the rudeness. Karajan turned to her and asked what matter. She told him the prince had asked her to become the princess's friend. Judging by everything Arabin had done, it was no different from a doll to be played with and thrown away when it stopped being useful. But when I saw her holding a strange man's hand, my eyes rolled back and I left where I was standing. And on top of that, he looked at the man in front of him. I feel strangely uncomfortable. Uncomfortable enough that I can't speak. He reached out and pinched her cheek. Because she looked like that, even a prince noticed her. He asked whether her schedule was only the princess's tea, or whether something else remained. Her cheeks went pink, and her voice came out small. Let go. She rubbed the sore, reddened cheek and said she'd been about to head back. She'd only come out because the princess suggested she look at the garden. He turned. In that case, if she'd seen enough, they'd go. She pointed out that she should at least say goodbye to the princess. Elios said he had pressed her into it, so she needn't worry. Not at all. She still owed him an answer and would think it over slowly. She thanked him sincerely for an offer that was far too generous. She didn't know what he'd seen in her, but she could feel how he loved his sister. That startled him. The smile stopped being warm, and his brow came down. If she had some concern, she didn't let him finish. If two people were friends of the same mind, wouldn't it happen naturally? If the prince's request was that she become the princess's friend, then she would be flattering her way into closeness. And Princess Arabin would not want that either. She was smiling perfectly on the outside and quietly panicking inside. That should be enough for him to understand. He was silent a long time, then said the young madam thought very deeply, and if that was her meaning, he would step back. He wouldn't mention today to Arabin, so nothing would be awkward. She asked whether that included the invitation. Yes, he said, and apologized for his stubbornness. Surprise crossed his face for a second, and then the mildness came back. The young madam was right. He had, without meaning to, been treating Arabin like a child. The conversation had been short but useful. He hoped they could speak longer next time. Once they left, Karajan rounded on Axie and asked what he'd been doing instead of intervening. He was quiet, then said softly that it was a prince. Even so, he should have stopped it before something bad happened. That was the point of following her. That one is definitely interested in Lumina. The second prince, apparently. He looked at her glittering in front of him and something clicked. Of course. If she shines this brightly in my eyes, naturally she does in other people's. He meant the second prince's face, he said. That astonished her. His face? Why would he ask that? Unless... So that's what all of that was about. She put a hand to her own chest and said she preferred black hair to white. He brightened considerably and said, well, obviously black hair. Then she asked why Karajan was here at all, since he was a free man, unbound by the Duke, with no reason to be at the imperial palace. She didn't follow. What is that supposed to mean? Goodness. Surely he wasn't following the young madam. It landed exactly on target. His face went red and he stammered a denial. She said gently that Karajan couldn't even enter the palace. Even if the young madam were bullied by a princess, all he could do was sit and wait. He panicked. Having landed it, she explained, because the palace was somewhere he could enter freely only as the Duke of Hurt. All this time he'd denied the family and never declared himself Duke of Hurt. Claiming the title only when he needed it meant refusing the duty and keeping the power. If he wanted to protect the young madam, he had to grow strength as the Duke of Hurt. That took him from shock into thought. Then I have to lean on that man, and I don't want to. He had to use everything worth using. Didn't he know that draining an enemy's spine was what a complete revenge looked like? That is not advice a loyal servant gives. She sighed and explained. She didn't mean faking harmony. At the very least, he should stay in the Duke's house. While the young lord had been away, the Duke had worried a great deal. And even wearing a suppressing ornament was not a perfect solution. The more the young lord was absent, the more the young madam's standing shook. He surely understood her by now. He should go and see the Duke immediately. So he went to his father's room. The man was clearly surprised to see him and asked what he needed. He walked to the desk and said darkly that it was noisy. Flowers with the same name as his mother. Did his father think he had any right to bring them in here? He was furious, and underneath it he was grieving. When he asked why his father had killed his mother, the man said it was an accident. I know perfectly well he was lucid, and I always wondered why he was never charged. If I can't escape this corner of the house my whole life, how can I say I'll protect her? It means nothing. But at least while Lumina is in this house, I don't want her hurt, and I don't want her crying. So, after all of that ran through him, he said one word, Father. Karajan turned his face away to avoid his father's eyes. He couldn't call him that the way he used to, but if the man didn't mind. Lucius looked at his son, then at the shattered vase on the floor and cut him off. This is your house. So stay if he wanted. In exchange, he had to resume the studies he'd abandoned. Lucius smiled slightly. So he'd become an adult. If he became Duke, he'd be strong enough to beat him, and then he could do as he pleased. He said it to his son plainly. Even if I die, even if this house is destroyed. Before any of that, he should pick up the flowers he'd thrown. Those were the ones Lumina gave him. Olivia, seeing the two of them repaired, was delighted. Wonderful, Lord Karajan. Let's work hard for the young madam together. He slapped the flowers down on the desk. Too noisy. Lucius reminded him he needn't advertise being a legend. The carriage was ready, so he should change first, since Lumina apparently liked neat dress. And he ran. So that had happened, he told her. but there was no need to explain it, meaning that even if the wounds vanished, he wasn't going anywhere. He added that it had been the right call, seeing the flies gathering. The insult frightened her, and she clapped a hand over his mouth. She noticed the red mark on Karajan's hand and asked how he'd hurt it. He looked away, red-faced, and said it was nothing, so she shouldn't use her power. He didn't realize she hadn't intended to. I was only curious how he got hurt. I wasn't going to use anything, she answered gently. The suddenness of it put color straight across her face. Elios was speaking. Lumina Lancy, truly a legend. A pity. Keeping her beside Araben would make it easier to confirm, since they'd collide far more often. Beside him, a dark shape spoke, and the low voice was frightening. Better to simply take her. The Duke of Hurt is certainly hiding a secret about the child who married his son. He remembered the words. Elios. The experiments will have to be carried out. He rose, the corner of his mouth lifting. My research collapsed because of that walking disaster of a man. Last time was more than enough. There's no need to hurry. We will have another chance to meet. And when we do, I intend to open her up and find out what is inside. So tell me, what exactly are you, Lumina Lancy?